Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. When I turned 14, I invited my two closest friends, Ethan and Caleb, to spend the night at my mom's place in Silver Springs. It was a small town tucked between foggy hills and tall pines, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the nights are a little too quiet. For my birthday, we ordered pizza, watched old horror flicks, my absolute favorite, and played a spooky board game called Nightmare. I even had a Nightmare Before Christmas themed cake with a handmade Jack Skellington topper made out of fondant. I was weirdly proud of that thing. I'd sealed it in a clear display box on my dresser because I didn't want it to get ruined. Everything was perfect until we went to sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a scream. It wasn't blood-curdling or anything, more like a startled shout. At first, I assumed it was my aunt, Melissa, coming home from the bar. She'd been living with us for a few months and often rolled in late, a little drunk and loud, usually with her best friend tagging along. I figured it was just them being dramatic again, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, something felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't put your finger on, but it crawls under your skin. I looked around my room and froze. The Jack Skellington sculpture was wrecked. His fondant limbs had been shredded, completely torn apart, but the plastic coffin I'd sealed him in was still snapped shut, untouched from the outside. It didn't make any sense. Nobody had moved it. The thing was across the room, up high on a shelf. We hadn't even touched it. At breakfast, I asked Melissa about the scream. She paused and looked at me confused. She said she thought the scream had come from our room. Then she told me something else. That night, after she got home, she and her friend had messed around with an old Ouija board they found in the attic. Said they were just goofing off, moving the planchette and laughing while sipping whiskey. But things got weird fast. She said her dog, Luna, a usually sweet black lab, started growling at the closet door, pacing back and forth like she was following something with her eyes. When they turned off the lights, they heard scratching on the walls, slow and deliberate. Then came a loud crash near the stereo, and Luna started whining, tail tucked. Melissa grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The stereo system, speakers, knobs, everything, had been turned completely around, like it had twisted itself to face the wall. She didn't sleep much after that. A few months later, she got married and moved out. I ended up taking her room, same closet, same corner. And from day one, something about it didn't feel right. One afternoon, my younger brother, Ryan, was hanging out in there with me. We were just talking, joking around, when we heard a loud thump come from inside the closet. The door was shut. It wasn't like something fell. It was heavier than that, like someone had dropped a full backpack from shoulder height. I remember telling myself not to be that idiot in horror movies who opens the door anyway. But I did. I turned the knob slowly, heart pounding, then yanked it open all at once like I'd catch something off guard. But there was nothing, just a folded up black trash bag poncho lying neatly in the middle of the floor. That night, I heard footsteps. They were soft, slow, and definitely outside my bedroom door. I kept the door cracked open. It made me feel less boxed in, but that only made it worse. Every step felt like it was coming closer. I sat up, listening, trying to convince myself it was the house settling or the wind. But the air was still, the night dead quiet. I got up to use the bathroom, but the moment I reached the doorframe, I froze. I couldn't bring myself to peek around the corner. I don't know why. I just couldn't. I ran back to bed. A while later, I tried again, but this time I heard the sounds inside my room. Like someone dragging their feet across the carpet, slow and deliberate, like they were toying with me. I bolted for the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I sat on the edge of the tub, breathing hard, trying not to cry. I seriously considered sleeping in there, on the floor, just to feel safe. Eventually, I left the bathroom light on. It cast a soft glow down the hall and into my bedroom. I crept back in, inch by inch. My hand brushed the wall until I found the switch. Light on. Nothing. The closet was empty. The floor was clean. Nothing under the bed. But I still left the light on that night. Even now, all these years later, I can't explain what happened in that house. Was it the Ouija board? The room? Just my imagination running wild? I don't know. All I know is, I've never felt fear like that since. Have you? It happened in the fall of 1994, a year that would leave a mark on my life I've never quite been able to shake. Everything started with tragedy, the murder of my older brother. He was found bound and shot, left on the shoulder of a remote highway outside Silver Springs, Oregon. Growing up, we'd been nearly inseparable, just 2 years apart, raised by a young single mother who had us when she was barely more than a kid herself. That bond, it felt like it couldn't be broken, and then, suddenly, it was. We had plans, big ones, not long before he died. My mom had just finalized her divorce from her second husband, and the three of us had decided to move in together. As adults this time. A fresh start. A second chance at something we lost along the way. On September 14, 1994, we got the call. We'd been approved for a cozy condo near the edge of town. It sat at the end of a tree-lined street, quiet and tucked away, with maple leaves already starting to turn. My mom and I were over the moon. We couldn't wait to tell my brother. But when I got home that afternoon, 2 detectives were waiting by the front steps. You know how it feels when they ask you to sit down first. It's never good. They told us his body had been identified from old juvenile fingerprint records. He'd had a minor run-in with the police when he was a teenager. Nothing serious. But that's how they knew it was him. He was just 19. I was 21. The funeral passed in a blur. Grief hit like a wave that never fully went away. But after weeks of sitting in that hollow space of loss, my mom and I chose to move forward. We thought he would have wanted us too. So we moved into the condo. Me, my mom, and my 2 kids. It was supposed to be a new beginning. A home filled with warmth, love, and healing. A few weeks in, on a chilly Sunday evening, I was downstairs in the laundry room. It was my usual routine. Get clothes folded, get ready for the week. I remember folding a long-sleeved floral blouse, one I wore often to work. I placed it neatly on top of a small pile on the couch in the den. Exhausted, I decided to leave the rest for the next day and headed up to bed. The next morning, the blouse was still there, right where I'd left it. I picked something else to wear and headed off to work. It also happened to be my mom's birthday that day, and she'd been having a tough time. I planned to surprise her that evening, with balloons, flowers, and a hot dinner waiting when she got home. I left work a little early and swung by the local market. By the time I got home, the house was still empty. I set the flowers on the dining table and ran upstairs to change. That's when I saw it. The floral blouse I'd left folded downstairs the night before. It was now laid out across my neatly made bed. It wasn't just tossed there either. It was spread out with both sleeves extended wide, almost in the shape of a cross, like someone had deliberately arranged it. I froze in the doorway. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay rational. Maybe Mom had come home earlier than I thought and brought it upstairs for some reason. Maybe she thought about wearing it. I brushed the moment aside and got ready for the evening. Later, after dinner, while we were clearing plates, I asked her casually, "Hey Mom, did you come home early today and grab that floral blouse off the couch?" She gave me a puzzled look. "What blouse?" "No, I was at work all day." "Why?" I told her what I'd found. The way it was laid out, the strange way it looked like it had been presented. She went quiet for a second, and then said, "Maybe you brought it up and forgot." But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. The kids had been with their dad that night. There was no one else in the house. No visitors. No reason for that blouse to be anywhere except where I'd left it. To this day, I still don't have an answer. But I keep going back to the same thought. Maybe it was my brother. Maybe he was just trying to let us know he was still around, watching, still part of the home we'd meant to build together. It wasn't scary, not exactly. Just strange, quietly unsettling. Sometimes I wonder, if the dead do reach out, is this how they do it? In quiet gestures, small rearrangements of the ordinary. That blouse never moved again after that day, but the memory still lingers, like the faint scent of his cologne in a room that's been empty for years. What do you think? Could it have been him? Or is grief just another kind of haunting? I had been on edge ever since the last encounter. That was the first time I genuinely felt afraid, like something out there wasn't just watching, but ready to reach out and harm me. Back then, I didn't know much about hauntings or how you're supposed to deal with them. I was just trying to live my life in peace. It was a Wednesday night in late February, cold and quiet, and I went to bed early like usual. I'm a natural early riser, the type who's up before the sun. Around midnight, I bolted upright, shaken from a nightmare I couldn't fully remember. My shirt clung to my back, soaked in sweat. The images were already slipping away, but the feeling lingered. Something dark, something wrong. I tossed the blankets aside and made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, letting the sheets air out in the meantime. When I returned, I climbed back into bed, scooting over to avoid the damp patch. I lay there, trying not to think too hard, hoping sleep would come quickly. Then I heard it. A strange sound, coming from the foot of the bed. My ears perked up, my breathing slowed. I propped myself up with a pillow against the headboard, listening. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then it came again, soft, mechanical, and oddly rhythmic. It sounded like someone slowly shaking a can of spray paint, but the pitch was lower, deeper, almost deliberate. I leaned forward, squinting toward the corner of the room. The sound had moved. It wasn't at the foot of the bed anymore. It was near the wall, just to the right. Then it jumped again, higher up, as if something unseen was crawling along the surface. The intervals shortened, 10 seconds apart, then 5, then 4. It picked up speed and force, bouncing from one side of the wall to the other. It wasn't random. It was aggressive, intentional. My heart pounded as I backed away from the sound. It felt like the walls were alive, vibrating with rage. I slid out of bed and crept down the hallway toward the front of the house. But the noise followed me. As I stepped into the utility room, the sound grew louder, more erratic. It was coming from the bathroom across from my bedroom now. I reached for the light switch, hand trembling, and turned it on. The soft glow did nothing to ease the dread building in my chest. The sound was now echoing inside the bathtub. And of course, the shower curtain was drawn. There was no way I was pulling that thing back with my bare hands. I grabbed the nearest broom and crept into the bathroom, holding the handle like a weapon. I stretched out my arm, hooked the edge of the curtain, and yanked it aside in one fast motion. Nothing. The tub was empty, but the sound, it was still there, still circling, as if something unseen was spiraling around inside it, daring me to react. I stood frozen, tears stinging my eyes, the broom still raised like it could protect me. The sound spun faster, louder, angrier, until finally, unbelievably, it started to fade. The tone shifted as it spiraled into the drain, like a whisper being sucked underground. And then it was gone. I stood in silence, chest heaving, unable to process what had just happened. When my legs finally allowed it, I ran to the front room and started pacing, trying to calm down. I sent a message to my friend Jennifer. She texted back right away, trying to reassure me from miles away, but I couldn't stop shaking. Eventually, I knew I had to try to rest. I had work in a few hours. Every light in the house stayed on as I returned to the bedroom. I lay on the far edge of the bed, facing the open doorway, needing to see the whole room at all times. Just when my body started to relax, the mattress dipped behind me. I froze. The pressure was unmistakable. Someone, or something, had just sat down right where the presence had been earlier. I could feel the indentation near my legs, see the shift in the sheets. My chest tightened. This wasn't sleep paralysis. I was awake, aware, and something was right behind me. I screamed. I shot out of bed and bolted for the front room, hyperventilating. I called Jennifer again, whispering fast and frantic. While we were on the phone, I noticed something new. The energy in the house had shifted. The utility room doorway seemed darker somehow, like it was radiating a pressure that reached into the room and settled heavy in my chest. The air was thick, almost wet. I couldn't bring myself to look away. It felt like if I blinked, whatever was there would move. I backed into the farthest corner of the room, phone in hand, broom still clutched in the other. I stayed there, trembling, barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, too afraid to move. I wanted to leave. I should have, but it was freezing outside, and I was still in my underwear. I waited for hours. Eventually, that thick, angry feeling began to fade. The room lightened, ever so slightly, like a pressure valve had been released. That was my cue. I sprinted to the bedroom, threw on the first clothes I could find, and got the hell out. I showed up at work 2 hours early and used the locker room shower to clean up. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. Couldn't focus. Couldn't shake the sound. A coworker noticed something was off and asked if I was okay. I told her the story, and to her credit, she believed me, or at least pretended to. But I dreaded going back to that house. When I finally returned, everything felt off, lopsided, unwelcoming. I walked straight to the front room and set up an air mattress. That bedroom was dead to me. For the next 2 weeks, I slept on the floor under the glow of every lamp in the house. I never went back into that room. And when my lease was up, I left without looking back. This happened just last Monday night, December 8th. My husband and I were in the thick of moving out of our place in Pine Hollow, a sleepy little town tucked between two fog-covered ridges in Oregon. Between packing boxes, chasing toddlers, and sleepless nights, I was completely drained. Around 10 p.m., I finally crawled into bed with my 4-month-old daughter. She was born early, just under 4 pounds, so she wasn't crawling yet. That fact gave me some peace of mind as I wrapped her gently in a blanket, settled her into the center of our queen-sized bed, and let the quiet of the room pull me into sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke suddenly, not to a cry or a sound from the baby, but to the unmistakable pitter-patter of small feet running toward my bedroom door. My first thought was my 2-year-old. She's been known to sleepwalk or wake up and wander. I sat up with a sigh, half frustrated, half concerned, and opened the door. But the hallway was empty. The air felt still, too still. I checked the girls' room, just to be sure. There they were, my toddler curled up between her older sisters, breathing softly, deep in sleep. I told myself it must have been a dream. Maybe stress. Maybe exhaustion. Either way, I went back to bed, tucked the baby in again, and drifted off. But by 3:30, I was jolted awake again, this time by a sound I'll never forget. A sharp, muffled cry. Not a normal baby cry. This one had a different edge to it, like fear or pain. My heart jumped into my throat. I sat up fast, instinctively sweeping the blankets off the bed, reaching for her. But she wasn't there. I froze. Pillows still lined one side of the bed. I had been on the other. There was no space for her to roll off, no gap big enough for her to slip through. My breath caught. I searched the sheets, the corners, checked behind me. Nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A tiny foot, sticking out from beneath the bed. I don't remember moving. I was just there, pulling her out. She was okay, scared, but okay. I clutched her to my chest, feeling that relief that makes your knees weak. But then, I smelled it. Something thick and strange clung to her skin. Oily, almost metallic. I couldn't place it. I checked on the other kids. They hadn't stirred. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I opened the back door and let our dog, Sugar, inside. She ran straight to our room. No hesitation. She growled low and fierce, then started pawing at the floor, trying to squeeze herself under the bed. When my husband got home later that morning, I told him everything. He didn't believe me, of course, said I probably dozed off and imagined the whole thing. But then he moved the bed while packing, and there it was. The baby's pacifier, right where I'd found her. It was slick with the same strange oil, and smeared on the wall behind the headboard. Something else. A round, greasy mark about the size of a dinner plate. It stank, like old engine oil mixed with rot. Neither of us had any explanation. Since that night, I haven't slept in that bedroom. I keep the baby with me always. Even Sugar growls sometimes, staring into the corners of the room like she sees something I can't. There's a feeling that lingers, heavy, like being watched. I tell myself it's just stress, just moving, just tiredness. But deep down, I don't believe that. Do you? Have you ever had something happen that made you question what's real, what's safe in your own home? Because I do, every night. And I don't think it's over. Here's something I haven't told many people. It's stayed with me for years, and even now, I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm the middle child of 5. Back then, I was around 9 or 10 when everything changed. My dad had to move out of our family home in a hurry. One of my sister's friends from ballet was moving away, and their house, an old 2-story place tucked into the woods on the edge of Pine Hollow, Oregon, just happened to be in the area my dad was looking at. It wasn't ideal. The house was way too small for 5 kids, 2 dogs, and a single parent, but my dad figured he could convert the lofts into extra bedrooms. So we moved in. That first night, none of our beds had arrived yet, so we slept on bare mattresses scattered across the floors. I wanted to sleep in my new room. I really did, but something kept me from going in. I just couldn't make myself cross the threshold. So I curled up next to my sister and our miniature dachshund, Lola. She usually wasn't much of a barker, but that night, she kept growling and barking at the bedroom door like someone was just outside. It was just us kids and Lola in the house. My dad had gone to grab takeout, and my older brother was at hockey practice. Then something weird happened. Lola started to whine, and all at once, the room turned freezing cold. And I mean cold. It was late spring, and Oregon doesn't usually get icy weather that time of year, especially not inside the house. Lola began leaping from mattress to mattress, pacing like she was trying to warn us. When my dad came home, she finally calmed down, but I refused to sleep in that room after that. Instead, I crashed in his home office. The office was the only room that was fully set up, complete with his old computer desk and this big, ugly recliner chair that I had already broken my foot on once. That night, while he typed away at some paperwork, I wrapped myself in a blanket and curled up in that chair. That's when I felt it. It started as a tickle on my foot, light enough to make me giggle, but then the tickle turned into something sharper, a pinch almost. I yelped and shouted for my dad to stop messing with me, only to find him still staring at his computer. He hadn't moved. That same thing happened multiple times whenever I slept in that chair. It was like something unseen was toying with me, just beneath the surface. A few weeks passed, and then Father's Day rolled around. We were all in my dad's room, handing him our hand-drawn cards and cheap gifts from the dollar store, except for my older brother, Matthew. When he finally joined us, he was fuming. "This house is haunted," he shouted. "You knew, didn't you? Mrs. Collins knew, and you didn't say anything." My dad gave this long sigh and admitted that, yeah, the previous owner had told him about some weird things before they sold. Apparently, she once turned around while folding laundry and saw a woman grinning at her, just standing there, watching. She screamed and tossed a towel at the figure before it vanished. Her cleaning crew had also quit without warning after running out of the house mid-shift. No one wanted to talk about why. Later that day, I went to change clothes in my room. I wasn't really a believer in ghosts, not back then, but as I walked down the narrow hallway, I caught sight of something dark near the front door. It was quick, a figure standing just within view. I screamed, My dad came running. "She's here," I told him. I saw her. Nobody else had seen anything up close yet, just faint orbs flickering at the edge of their vision. They brushed it off like it was nothing. I didn't. A couple months later, school started again. One morning, I was fixing my hair in the hallway mirror, the same spot I'd first seen her, and there she was. This time she wasn't just a shadow. She was clear, almost glowing. A young woman with shoulder-length hair, a white blouse tied at the front, and a light skirt that hit just below the knee. She looked like someone straight out of the 1960s. Her hand was resting on my shoulder in the mirror, but when I spun around she was gone. In her place was a black shadow that drifted backward and vanished into the hallway wall. I ran to my dad, completely shaken. I could barely speak. Then came the night I woke up to a loud whoosh. My standing fan had toppled over, even though it was several feet from the bed. It felt like something had lifted me off the mattress and slammed me back down. I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Whatever it was, whoever it was holding me there. Eventually, I was released, and when I checked, the fan was upright, the window closed and locked. That same night, I heard someone humming, a soft lullaby, feminine, nostalgic, eerie. I buried my head under the pillow and yelled, "Go away. My mom doesn't live here." Other strange things started happening. My pet mouse, Roxy, had a squeaky metal wheel she rarely used, but at night it would spin like crazy. Every time I checked, Roxy was sound asleep. The house gave everyone a weird feeling, and it only got worse. People who came to view it when we tried to sell would walk in excited and leave visibly disturbed. Even our pets weren't acting right. Roxy killed one of my sister's mice, seemingly unprovoked. Another mouse, Cookie, died with no warning. No illness, no injuries, just gone. Then one day, Roxy had this deep gash across her side. We rushed her to the vet, but they couldn't explain it. No sharp objects, no falls. Nothing. My dad and I eventually dug into the house's history. We discovered that every family who had lived there was somehow connected to the one before, like the house was passing through some strange, unseen thread. Then we brought in a psychic. She didn't hesitate. She pointed straight to the recliner in the office and said that's where the mother liked to linger. My bedroom, she said, had belonged to her daughter, the one who had died there. The ghost didn't want me to leave. She thought I was her daughter. That's why she kept reaching out. Even after we moved into a newly built home with no prior tenants, she followed me. One night I got up for a glass of water, and as I stepped into the hallway, there she was, just standing there. The same clothes, the same faint glow, just watching. I still wonder if she's projecting from the old house, or if she's bound to me somehow. My dad believes I have some kind of ability, that I can see things others can't. I'm not sure. Maybe I was just more open to it. Maybe I was the only one who listened. Even my mom had her home blessed by a church deacon once, despite never being religious. I'm not sure if it helped. Maybe it made things worse. But even now, I think about that house, that mirror, that hand on my shoulder, and I wonder, did she ever really leave? Have you ever seen something no one else believed was there? Before we get into it, just sit back, close your eyes if you like, and listen as I tell you about something I still can't fully explain. This happened a few years ago, and to this day, it lingers in the back of my mind like a shadow that never quite leaves. After a work transfer, I found myself in a quiet little town called Pine Hollow, tucked away in the rural hills of northern Georgia. My new job was with a center that offered day programs for adults with disabilities. It was peaceful work, fulfilling in its own way. I ended up renting a modest house just outside of town, not far from the old train tracks that hadn't seen use in years. The house was small but cozy. The living room and kitchen took up the front, while in the back, there was a bedroom on one side and a utility room that led to a hallway, a full bathroom, and another bedroom, mine. It felt right, quiet, private. But sometimes that kind of quiet makes it easier to hear what you're not supposed to. At first, nothing seemed off, but little things started happening. So small I almost didn't notice. The stereo would be on in the morning when I knew I'd turned it off the night before. I chalked it up to forgetfulness. But then I started losing things, keys, a watch, my phone charger, only to find them hours later in places I knew I hadn't been. I lived alone. There was no one to blame it on. One afternoon, I was chatting in the kitchen with my neighbor, Carol, when a ceramic bowl on the counter slowly rotated halfway around. Right in front of us. Neither of us touched it. It just moved. Carol froze, her face pale, and muttered something about bad energy. She avoided my house for weeks after that. One weekend, my buddy Michael came down from Atlanta to hang out. He brought his yellow lab, Duke, super friendly dog, the kind that gets excited over just about everything. We planned to throw some ribs on the smoker and invite a few people over. As Duke ran through the house sniffing every room, I remember thinking how good it felt to have company. That night, as we relaxed out back with drinks and music, everything seemed perfect. But after dinner, I went inside to tidy up. As I passed through the kitchen, I glanced toward the utility room and froze. The large framed mirror from the bathroom. It was now neatly propped against the cabinet below the sink. It hadn't shattered, hadn't even tilted. It looked like someone had carefully moved it. That mirror was heavy. I'd installed it myself with anchors and everything. There's no way it just slid down. I called Michael in. He stared at the mirror, then back at me. "You move this?" he asked. I shook my head. Wouldn't even make sense to. Then came the sound of Duke barking, loud and angry, from the doorway of the utility room. He stood there, growling, hackles raised, refusing to take a single step further. We tried calling him in, even offering leftover ribs, but he wouldn't budge. For the rest of the weekend, he avoided that part of the house like it was on fire. The next morning, Michael and I were deciding on breakfast. He suggested heading into town, but I told him I had plenty of eggs and bacon. He followed me to the kitchen. As I reached for the fridge handle, I felt something brush against the back of my leg. I turned fast. On the floor behind me was a small ceramic vase, one that had been sitting on top of the fridge. Michael's face went white. "Dude," he whispered, "it didn't fall. It flipped. It came over your head." I hadn't seen a thing, but from the way he looked at me, like he'd seen a ghost, I didn't doubt him. That was the last time he stayed overnight. To this day, if I bring it up, he changes the subject. Says he doesn't mess with haunted stuff. Most of the time, the house felt tolerable. The weirdness would come in waves, like the tide. But the worst moment came late one night, when I was home alone. I had gone to bed early and was sound asleep when something woke me. Footsteps. They were soft but deliberate, muffled by carpet, and coming from the living room. My bedroom door was open. At first, I tried convincing myself I was dreaming, but the sound was too real. Steady, getting closer. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared into the hallway, illuminated faintly by moonlight through the window. There was no one there, but I could hear it, steps moving into the utility room down the hall, heading straight toward me, and then into my bedroom. They stopped at the foot of my bed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. It was like my body was frozen in place. I couldn't see anything, just that empty air where something should have been. The footsteps continued, 1, 2, stopping halfway up the side of the bed, right next to me. I stayed like that until morning light crept through the blinds. When I finally stood up and walked around, I noticed something. My own footsteps on the carpet made the exact same sound I'd heard the night before. Even now, I can't fully explain what I lived through in that house. It wasn't just the strange events. It was the sensation of being watched, like something was quietly waiting for me to acknowledge it. The house wasn't evil. It was more like it was alive. So, let me ask, have you ever stayed somewhere that just didn't want to be alone? Let me tell you something strange that started with a dream, but didn't end there. One night, after finally getting my baby girl to sleep, I dozed off myself. That's when the dream began. I was standing on the second-floor balcony of an old, creaky house, one I didn't recognize. In my arms, I held my daughter. She was wearing a white dress and a little bonnet, the kind you'd see in an old photograph. But below us, there was nothing, just a pitch-black void where the ground should have been. She reached up and gently touched my cheek, guiding my face toward her. But when I looked again, it wasn't her anymore. It was a little boy. His eyes were too wide, too aware. Before I could even react, his hands shot up and wrapped around my throat. I struggled, choking, my arms flailing as I fought to breathe. I managed to shove him away, and he tumbled backward into the darkness. But even as he vanished, his laughter echoed, high-pitched, gleeful, and terribly wrong. That laugh followed me as I snapped awake, drenched in sweat. For the next 3 nights, I had the same dream, same boy, same balcony, same laughter. It started to feel less like a dream and more like something real. Something that didn't want to leave. Not long after, my mom helped me get my own place, a small unit in a quiet complex just outside of Aspen, Colorado. She lived in the building next door, close enough to help but far enough to give me space. I hoped that moving out would help settle whatever had attached itself to me, but I was wrong. The very day I moved in, I heard it. A child crying, soft at first, like a distant echo down a long hallway. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was someone else's kid, but something about it, it didn't feel right. The next day, around noon, I laid my daughter down for her nap and decided to rest a little myself. When I woke up, I instinctively glanced over at her crib and froze. Standing next to her was a little boy, pale, almost glowing, his head tilted slightly like he was curious. I blinked hard, but he didn't disappear. He just stood there watching me. I sat up slowly, heart hammering, but before I could say anything, the crying returned, this time from the hallway closet. I followed the sound with shaking hands and opened the closet door. Silence. Nothing inside. This started to happen more and more. The crying, the boy, the feeling that something was always just behind me. Eventually, I gave him a name, Isaac. I don't know why. It just felt right. Or maybe he told me in one of those strange dreams I couldn't remember after waking. Oddly enough, Isaac didn't always feel threatening. Sometimes, when I sang lullabies to calm my daughter, I'd hear a soft hum underneath my voice, like he was singing along. He liked to move the dining chairs out of place, and no matter how many times I fixed them, they'd end up crooked again. At night, I'd hear whispers while lying in bed. He would speak to me softly, but come morning, I could never remember a single word. My family started noticing him too. He wasn't shy. Visitors would freeze mid-sentence, glancing over their shoulders, sensing something they couldn't explain. We even had a priest come by to bless the apartment. But Isaac stayed. One December evening in 1994, we were all gathered for dinner. My mom, my sister, my aunt. Everyone was there. We were laughing, telling stories, and then the lamp in the corner flicked on by itself. Silence fell. We all stared at it. I walked over, turned it off. A moment later, it flicked back on. We all left not long after that. Even when I wasn't home, Isaac made it clear he was still around. I'd walk back from the car and see the blinds in my window shift, as if someone was peeking out at me. When I'd open the front door, the room would feel thick, like I'd walked into a place that wasn't quite empty. Then, after 4 long months, something changed. A family friend came by, someone who didn't believe in ghosts. He joked about Isaac, taunting him. "Send him home with me," he laughed. "I'll show him who's boss." He cursed, rolled his eyes, and made light of everything. That night, as the friend pulled out of the driveway, I looked toward the end of the street and saw Isaac, standing still, waving. His silhouette was faint under the street lamp, but unmistakable. I rushed to my mom, nearly in tears. He was gone, but not gone for good. Our friend called a few weeks later. He'd moved out of state, but the crying had followed him. The hums, the flickering lights, the whispers. Since then, he's moved 2 more times. but Isaac goes wherever he goes, and nothing, not blessings, not prayers, not denial, has stopped him. So, do you think Isaac ever really left, or did he just find a new home? This happened in Pine Hollow, a small, sleepy town tucked into the hills of southern Pennsylvania. My best friend Emily lives there with her daughter, while I'm just across the state line in Ohio. Emily's a single mom to a sweet, imaginative 7-year-old named Grace. Back in the fall of 2011, after her marriage fell apart, Emily was desperate for a fresh start. She didn't want to move back in with her folks, so she was beyond thrilled when she found a 2-bedroom rental just outside town. Quiet street, fenced backyard, basement included. Affordable too. She called me buzzing with excitement. I couldn't pass it up, she said. A week later, she started moving in. At first, Grace didn't seem too happy about it. She told Emily, "I don't like this house." Emily chalked it up to homesickness and the stress of change. "You'll get used to it," she told her gently. "It's going to be even better than the old place." And for a short while, it looked like she was right. Things felt normal. A week after they got settled, I came to visit. My first impression was how old the house felt. Emily mentioned that the landlord said it had been built in 1912. That stuck with me. The layout was small and oddly shaped, definitely not modern. The living room had this dated, wood-paneled look that screamed 1970s. A narrow hallway led to the bathroom and Emily's room, and across from that, a few steps went down into the kitchen. There was something off about the kitchen. It had this lingering chill, almost like a draft was sneaking in from somewhere. I figured it was just the A/C or poor insulation. A back hallway led to Grace's room and the door to the yard, while on the far side of the kitchen was a thick wooden door that led to the basement. Emily admitted that the basement gave her the creeps, but she brushed it off. We went down to look, and the moment I stepped off the last stair, I felt lightheaded, like the air shifted. "I think I need to eat something," I mumbled. It wasn't like me to feel faint. I didn't say anything else, though. That night, after I went home, I couldn't shake the uneasiness that clung to me. Something about the house just didn't feel right. A week later, Emily called me. Her voice was low and serious. "My house is haunted." I gave a nervous chuckle, waiting for the punchline. But she wasn't joking. Not even close. She told me it started just a few nights after I left. One evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Emily stepped into the shower to wind down. Halfway through rinsing her hair, she heard the bathroom door creak open. Thinking Grace needed something, she peeped out. Nothing. No one was there. A few minutes later, as steam fogged the shower door, she saw something that chilled her to the bone. A large handprint, slowly forming on the glass. Bigger than hers. Much bigger. Definitely a man's. "I've never been that scared," she said. The next morning, Emily was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass in the kitchen. She groaned, assuming Grace had gotten up early and broken something. But when she got there, she found 3 of her grandmother's porcelain dishes shattered on the floor. They'd somehow fallen from the cabinet, yet Grace was still asleep in her room. She hadn't even stirred. Emily didn't say anything to her daughter. She didn't want to scare her. But things kept escalating. One afternoon, while Grace was at school, Emily went into the basement to pull up some storage boxes. The space was dark and musty, with a poured concrete floor and makeshift wooden walls. A few odd items had been left behind by the last tenants, including a large rug hanging like a curtain across one of the walls. Curious, she decided to pull it down. That's when she found it. A hidden door, old, wooden, fitted with a rusted latch that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Shaken, Emily called her landlord right away. "Why didn't you tell me about the extra door in the basement?" she asked. The landlord sounded genuinely confused. She insisted she had no idea it even existed. Later that day, the landlord came over, and together, they used bolt cutters to open the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room with unfinished wooden flooring. The walls were painted completely black. Inside, there was just one thing, a worn wooden table with a bouquet of long dead roses sitting on it. But what struck Emily the most were the ropes. 2 of them tied to opposite walls. Restraints. It looked like someone had been kept there. Emily tried to step forward to move the flowers, but the moment she did, a crushing panic hit her chest. Her breathing grew shallow, her vision tunneled. It felt like something didn't want her in there. Shaking, she backed away. "Fine, keep your flowers," she muttered. They sealed the room with a new latch, and Emily didn't step foot in that basement again. That night, Emily had a nightmare. She dreamed of a little blonde-haired boy and a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes. They were inside the house, only it looked like it did in the 1970s. In the dream, the man raged, accusing the boy of ruining his marriage. Then he lifted a shotgun and fired, first at the boy, then at himself. Emily jolted awake, soaked in sweat. Before she could catch her breath, Grace screamed from the other room. Emily rushed in to find her daughter sobbing. "He said the boy ruined his marriage," Grace cried. "Then he shot him, right in the kitchen." Emily felt her stomach drop. How could they both have had the same dream? She didn't know what to say. All she could do was hold Grace and whisper that it was just a nightmare. But it didn't stop. Desperate, Emily sent Grace to stay with her grandparents for the weekend. That night, she tried to unwind with a movie, but she kept hearing it, knocking sounds. Slow, deliberate knocks, coming from the basement. When she got up to grab a drink, she paused in the kitchen. She had that feeling again, like someone was standing just beyond the door, watching. She locked it and tried to ignore it. But after dinner, she noticed it again. The basement door was wide open. "I know I shut you," she muttered. She locked it again, this time yanking on the knob to be sure. As she turned to leave, 3 loud knocks pounded from the other side. Emily froze. She didn't wait around. She sprinted upstairs and called me, her voice shaking. The next morning, I drove over with a small cross I kept in my living room. I didn't know what else to do. Emily hung it above the kitchen door, hoping it would bring some kind of peace. We spent the day out, trying to clear her mind. But when we returned, the air inside the house had shifted. It was cold, freezing cold. In the sink, 4 more plates and 2 glasses were shattered. And the cross? It was hanging upside down. Emily collapsed into tears. "I thought this place was going to be our fresh start," she whispered. "I just wanted normal." But the house had other plans. She couldn't break the lease, and the landlord, though she now knew about the hidden room, still hadn't done anything. Emily's changed since all this started. She's quieter now, worn down. The last time I spoke to her, she told me the knocking had spread throughout the house. Sometimes it started in the walls, sometimes the ceiling. And Grace? She saw the man again. This time, she said he was standing right next to her bed. He didn't speak. He just stared until she screamed. Now Grace refuses to sleep in her room. Emily's trying to find out more about the house's past, but records are sparse. The landlord still claims ignorance. The couple who lived there before Emily barely lasted a year before they moved out. No forwarding address. Emily feels trapped. And honestly, I don't know what's worse, what already happened, or what might be waiting next. What do you think? Would you stay? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Back in the summer of 2002, my wife at the time and I decided to take a short getaway with her 2 sons. One of them was a high school hockey player, tough kid, always ready for an adventure. We needed a break from the everyday noise of life, so we booked a rustic weekend in a small town called Silver Springs in Arkansas. There was this off-the-grid campground just outside of town, near an old wooded property that bordered a shallow, winding river. The draw? The area was rumored to have been part of an old Native American trail, and visitors could rent out teepees or a single elevated cabin tucked deep in the trees. At first, we rented one of the teepees for the novelty of it. It seemed fun, different. But as night fell and the bugs came out in full force, My wife wasn't exactly thrilled with the experience. The canvas walls didn't keep out the humidity, and the air had that swampy thickness to it that never quite lets you sleep. So I walked back to the small front office to ask about the cabin, and lucky for us, it was available. We moved in before sunset. The cabin sat about 8 feet off the ground on wooden stilts, with stairs leading up to a wraparound porch. I'm 6 feet tall, and even when I stood directly underneath the floorboards, there was still at least 2 feet of headroom. Beneath the cabin, it was just packed dirt. No grass, no weeds. That evening, a light rain started to fall, just enough to turn the ground soft. You could see the imprint of every step you took. It made things feel exposed, like the earth itself was keeping track of us. That night, we kicked off our muddy shoes before stepping inside and settled in. It was quiet, just the faint hum of the rain and the occasional chirp from the woods nearby. I sat on the bed, which was against the far wall, and leaned back. The headboard was nothing more than a wooden plank bolted to the wall, maybe a foot high. I tilted my head back and let it rest against the cool wood. And then, bam! Something slammed into the wall right behind my head. Not tapped. Slammed. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. It was sharp and loud, like someone had taken a sledgehammer and swung it with everything they had. My wife jumped. The boys froze. The impact shook the frame of the cabin. My first instinct was that someone had thrown something, but the spot where it hit was well over 13 feet above ground level outside. The cabin floor sat 8 feet up. The bed added a couple more, and my head brought it close to 13. Whatever hit that wall had to be massive, or flying. My stepson and I grabbed our boots and ran outside within seconds. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet enough to leave tracks. We checked the entire area under the cabin and beyond, scanning with a flashlight. Nothing. No footprints. No one in sight. No tree branch or object lying around that could have fallen or been thrown. Just silence, and that uneasy tightness in your chest when something isn't right. Later that night, the noises came back, soft shuffling near the woods. We stepped onto the porch, 35mm camera in hand, and took a few photos into the dark. The tree line was about 50 feet away. We couldn't see much, but we could hear rustling, branches swaying, something moving between them. When we got the film developed, most of the pictures were blank or just too dark, but a few, they were different. A couple showed orbs, translucent, pastel-colored spheres floating in the air. One picture had maybe 6 or 7, but another, this one still sends chills down my spine, had at least 30. No exaggeration. They clustered near the tree line like a silent crowd watching us. And then there was that one photo. At the edge of the frame, a streak of color, like a light trail. It was long, maybe 6 or 7 feet, glowing pink at one end and fading to a deep purple. It wove between the trees in a way that made it look like it had mass. It was blocking some trees in the background, and others in the foreground were partially hiding it. We hadn't seen anything with our own eyes, but there it was on the film, clear as day, a shape that didn't belong. Back home, we loaded the images onto our computer and zoomed in. One of the orbs showed something inside it. Faint, but there, a face. Unmistakably human, blurred, expressionless, and staring straight back at us. I reached out to the owner of the property and told him everything. He didn't even flinch. No apology. No confusion. Just a shrug and a change of subject. It felt like he already knew. I don't have the photos anymore. My ex-wife kept them after the divorce. But I still remember every sound, every feeling, every second of that night. Something was out there. And even now, I still wonder what it wanted and why it came so close. What do you think it was? Have you ever stayed somewhere that didn't feel entirely empty? The house I grew up in sat on a sloped street just outside the quiet town of Pine Ridge, Oregon. It was one of those old, creaky homes that had been added onto over the years. 4 floors stacked like a Jenga tower, each with its own quirks. The basement opened off the kitchen at the back of the house, dark and always a little too cold. One floor up was the front entrance, our cozy living room, and my brother's so-called gaming lair. My mom and brother shared the next floor, and I had the top all to myself, my bedroom and the only full bathroom, which meant every time I was downstairs grabbing a late-night snack, I'd have to trek all the way up if nature called. Not exactly ideal. It really started the summer we all went on vacation to the Oregon coast. I asked my buddy Kyle, who lived across the street, to watch the pets and check on the house while we were gone. He's always been dependable and said he'd be happy to help. When we got back, Kyle mentioned, kind of offhandedly, that he had a weird feeling the whole time he was there. Said it felt like someone was watching him, especially in the kitchen. He even heard voices upstairs once and swore he saw a man just standing at the top of the staircase that led to the living room. I brushed it off. That part of the house was always shadowy and full of weird acoustics. Old houses do that. I figured his imagination got the best of him. Things stayed pretty normal for a while, until one night when I was getting changed in my room and heard footsteps coming up the stairs. You know how, we've lived in a house long enough, you can recognize footsteps. Mom had a quick pace. My brother dragged his feet. This sounded like neither. I called out, "Hello." No answer. I walked out onto the landing. No one. I checked the whole house. Turns out Mom and my brother had gone out for groceries and didn't say anything. So, those footsteps weren't them. From that point on, something shifted. I started getting that feeling, the one where you know you're not alone. Like there's something standing just behind the curtain of the ordinary, watching. I began seeing things. Or maybe, someone. Just a silhouette at first. A man-shaped shadow lingering at the edge of the hallway or standing silently near the stairs outside my mom's room. Our dog would sometimes fixate on empty spaces, growling low in his throat or barking suddenly like he was warning something off. I kept it to myself for a while. My mom's a nurse. She's seen it all. Trauma, tragedy, mental illness. But she doesn't believe in anything paranormal. She shuts that door hard, so I stayed quiet. Then came the summer they both went back to the coast for a week. I stayed behind to look after the house. That was the first time I'd been completely alone in that house for more than a night or two. The atmosphere, different, heavier. The shadow man, he started showing up more. Still blurry, always just out of focus. He wasn't near the living room anymore. Now he was by the basement steps. Every time I walked past, I'd feel my stomach tighten. Then the electronics started messing up. Lights I know I turned off would flicker back on. The smoke alarm would go off randomly. One morning I woke to the sound of voices, only to find the TV on, even though the only way to turn it on was with a button on the remote, which was buried under a pile of mail on the table. And the cellar door, the one I always kept shut, I'd find it wide open. Things would fall off shelves, books, picture frames, always when a friend was over, like the house wanted them gone. One evening, Kyle stopped by for dinner. I was upstairs on a call when he came in through the kitchen. When I came down, he was pale. He said he saw someone in the hallway, a man, standing still. He thought it was an intruder and nearly tackled him, until the figure disappeared into thin air. Kyle doesn't believe in ghosts. He's a hardline skeptic, but even he admitted something felt off. As he left that night, he looked back at the house and muttered, "Feels like whatever's in there just claimed you again." That comment stuck with me. Later that night, I did something weird. I don't know why. I sat on the couch and told the ghost, whatever it was, that it could sit with me. I just didn't want it to feel unwelcome. The dog, who'd been following something invisible down the hallway, suddenly jumped up onto the opposite sofa and stared hard at the spot next to me. He didn't move a muscle until my mom came home the next day. It only got weirder. One night, I felt something snatch a figurine off my bedroom mantel and shake it. When I looked up, it stopped. I finally told my mom everything. She didn't want to hear it, said I needed to stop, that she didn't want fear in our home. I understood, but still. Here's the strange part. It only ever seemed to target me. My mom and brother, nothing. No shadows, no sounds. My friends and I. Constant. It's like it knew who would see it. Eventually, I got used to it. We coexisted. In some strange way, I started to feel safe with it around. But over time, its presence faded. And I never thought I'd say this, but I kind of missed it. Now I live with my girlfriend in an upstairs apartment just outside Eagle Bend, Montana. We've been together 14 months. Things were good. Until about a week ago. We were lying in bed when I heard it. Heavy footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom. At first, I thought it might have been our downstairs neighbors. But the steps got faster, sharper, and then they stopped. Then started again, running this time. And the floor, it shook. Like something big was stomping back and forth just outside our door. I was scared. I pulled a pillow over my head and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the hallway outside our apartment, it has that same heavy feel, like the air's too thick. Every time I walk through it, the hairs on my arms stand up. I don't look around anymore. I just keep my eyes forward, even though I always feel like something's standing just outside my peripheral vision. The next morning, my girlfriend left early for work. I stayed in bed. That's when I heard it. A ripping, scraping sound. It was coming from the edge of the mattress, like fingernails tracing along the fabric. I watched the indentation move. I heard it, loud and clear. I sat up fast and yelled, told it to go away. The sound stopped instantly. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I imagined it. But then, a couple days ago, I walked into the kitchen. I propped the door open like I always do and flicked on the lights. Our 2 cats were lounging in the living room that afternoon. The house was quiet, just the low hum of the fridge in the background and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Then, without warning, every electrical appliance in the house shut off. Lights, heater, the TV, all of it. The sudden silence was deafening. And that's when I felt it. A blast of icy air, like someone had opened a door behind me during a snowstorm. The swinging door that connected the kitchen to the hallway slammed shut with such force that it echoed. My heart jumped. Without thinking, I bolted into the bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it behind me. I stood there in the silence, trying to catch my breath. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to check the fuse box out in the hall. When I opened the panel, every switch, even the ones that hadn't been used in years, was flipped off. All of them. I reset the whole system, trying to stay calm. Once the power came back on, I went into the kitchen and shut the door behind me, trying to keep the uneasy feeling at bay. But one of our cats started hissing violently, low, guttural, and furious. He was staring at the hallway door, his fur on end. Then he began running in frantic circles before diving under the sofa, growling in a way I'd never heard from him before. He stopped as suddenly as he started. I was so rattled, I grabbed my keys and went to work, even though it was my day off. I just couldn't stay in that house. But the next morning was worse. I was in the bathroom shaving, the door cracked open, when a familiar and unwelcome feeling crept in, that icy weight of being watched. I looked toward the hallway just as something black, like a shadowy figure or a mist, glided past the door. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. I slammed the door shut and ran into the bedroom, waking up my girlfriend. I couldn't stop shaking. It's like something's latched onto me. I can't explain it. Every time I'm home, there's this thick, lingering dread. But the moment I step outside, it lifts, like sunlight pushing back fog. Whatever this is, it's focused on me, and I have no idea why. What's strange is, I'm no stranger to the supernatural. I grew up in a haunted house. I was born in a small Colorado town on a freezing January morning in 1976. My dad, Frank, was a decorated pilot in the U.S. Air Force, and my mom, Ann, was a local hairstylist who also worked as a part-time photographer for the town paper. I'm the middle kid, 2 older brothers, a younger brother, and a pair of identical twin sisters. It was a full house. When I was just 2 months old, we moved to an old Victorian farmhouse on the outskirts of Aspen Hollow. It was nearly 120 years old, with a giant wraparound porch, a creaky attic, and a backyard that stretched all the way to the tree line. There was even a weathered chicken coop out back where we kept hens for eggs. Not long after settling in, we got a dog, a gentle collie lab mix named Lucky, and 2 cats, Missy, a sweet tortoise shell, and Rusty, a lazy ginger tabby. We kids loved them fiercely, and they were endlessly patient with us. I still miss them. The house sat at the end of a long gravel lane, with nothing but open fields and a distant barn past the fence. It was a paradise for kids, but it didn't take long before we all realized we weren't alone in that house. The first clue? A ghost saved my life. My mom told me the story years later, and even now, she swears it happened exactly as she remembers. I had been down for a nap around 10 a.m. She left the bathroom door cracked while she showered across the hall, just in case I cried out. My brothers were playing at the neighbors, and Dad was on base that day. The house should have been quiet, but while she was rinsing off, she heard it. Doors slamming open and shut in the hallway. And then, clear as day, a woman's voice said, "Check on the baby, please. Go now." It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't in her head. It was an old woman's voice, speaking calmly, urgently. Mom froze. There was no one else in the house, and no one, especially not an old woman, should have been speaking. She ran out, dripping wet, and saw every door in the hall wide open, except mine, which was swinging slightly on its hinges. Then the voice came again. "Check the baby. Quick now." She rushed into my room and found me face down in the crib, my nose and mouth wedged tightly against the side of the mattress. I couldn't breathe. I was turning blue. She pulled me out, flipped me over, and I started gasping, just in time. Later that day, the doctor said I was okay, just a little bruised. But Mom never forgot that voice. She believed with every part of her soul that someone, something, had warned her. After that, she began noticing other spirits in the house, and so did we. There was a boy in the backyard, always dressed in clothes from another time, 1890s maybe. He had suspenders and a newsboy cap, and he'd bounce a small rubber ball silently along the fence. My brother saw him the most. He never talked, never looked directly at anyone, but sometimes there were tears on his cheeks. We also had what we called Punk, a black and white cat with a spiky patch of fur on its head. No one knew where it came from. It wasn't ours, but it would curl up in the middle of the kitchen floor or by the old TV cabinet, just lying there. You'd walk past it, then look back, and it would be gone. Then there was the lady. She wore a faded dress from the 1920s and appeared at the front gate like clockwork. She'd walk slowly toward the porch, always stopping just short of the front steps, then vanish. It was eerie, like she was stuck in some kind of loop. Even my grandmother saw her during a visit and refused to come back after that. And finally, there was the night routine. Lights would flicker in the kitchen and the den. Then came the footsteps, heavy, tired ones, dragging themselves up the hall toward my parents' room. Always the same path, always the same sound. Like someone who used to live there was still coming home every night, long after death. We got used to it. The strange became normal, but it shaped who I became. 3 years ago, I got a job bartending at a place in Pine Hollow, the next town over. When I told Dad, he smiled and said, "That old place, huh? That used to be a boarding house back in the 30s. Rumor was, one of the guests never checked out." I used to work at a place called the Hollow Oak Tavern, a cozy old pub in the heart of Pine Lake, Pennsylvania. Before it was a bar, it had been part of the town's old jailhouse. It still sat right next to the local sheriff's office, and some of the original stonework remained in the foundation. In the tavern's basement, there was a strange cement wall that had clearly been built to seal something off. Behind that wall, I was told, there was an entire system of tunnels, passageways that once connected the jail to the courthouse and other buildings downtown. Most folks just brushed it off as small-town folklore, but some of us weren't so sure. I worked there for almost a year, and during that time, I started dating Lucas, the son of the couple who owned the tavern. He actually lived there, in an upstairs apartment just above the bar. It didn't take long for him to start telling me about the strange things he experienced since moving in. On his very first night, before the place was fully furnished, he slept on a mattress in what would eventually become the living room. He told me he woke up in the middle of the night to the sensation of being shaken, and then a gravelly voice whispered close to his ear, "Go home. This is our place." After that, he moved to an upstairs bedroom, but the strange occurrences continued. Doors slammed with no wind. Sharp knocks echoed along the walls late at night. He described it like the building itself was alive, restless. Eventually, he switched rooms again. That's when I spent my first night there. I was excited, curious even, to see if anything creepy would happen, but I also felt uneasy, like I was stepping into someone else's space. That night, I didn't hear anything unusual, but there was a change in the air around 3 a.m. It was subtle at first, but soon it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. The air turned thick, heavy, like something was watching from the corners. I couldn't explain it. I just knew I wasn't alone. About 4 months later, I worked a late Friday shift at the tavern. We had already closed, and only the owners and I were still around, chatting at the bar. That's when I heard the men's restroom door creak open. I had my back to the hallway, maybe 10 feet away. Then came the sound of slow, heavy footsteps across the wooden floor. I heard keys jingling, like someone had a ring of them clipped to their belt, slapping against their hip as they walked. I turned to my boss and asked, "Who else is here?" I thought everyone left. He looked at me like I was joking, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. I asked him again, but he just laughed and said I must have had one too many. But I knew what I heard. The sound of those keys was too clear, too specific. I wasn't imagining it. Another night, I was in Lucas's room. He had mentioned earlier that the place felt off, like something was about to happen. He went to the bathroom, and I stayed on the bed with the music paused, just sitting in the stillness. Out of nowhere, a deep guttural growl came from the middle of the room. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was the kind of sound you feel in your spine. I should have been terrified, but instead I laughed. I don't know why. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe something darker. For a second, I even had the urge to growl back. But I didn't. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered hearing that growling like that is often linked to demonic energy. So I stayed quiet. Later that night, we went downstairs to grab a snack. To get to the kitchen, we had to pass the basement door, which was always locked. As we walked past, we heard what sounded like someone rustling through a pile of chip bags on the other side. We paused. It was weird, but we figured maybe it was just the old building settling. But then, as we started back up the stairs, we heard a massive thud behind us, followed by loud knocks, 3 of them on the basement door. Then it sounded like a full box of snacks got shoved down the steps. We bolted upstairs without looking back. There were no snack boxes stored in the basement. We didn't want to know what was. A week later, Lucas, his mom, and I were sitting in the kitchen. Just beyond the kitchen was a long hallway that led to the lower tavern area. As we sat chatting, we heard the unmistakable sound of a little girl running down that hallway. Tiny footsteps and high-pitched giggling. Lucas's 3-year-old niece, Ellie, visited often. So we all stood up, assuming she and her parents had arrived early. But when we went to look, no one was there. We checked the door. It was still locked. No cars outside. Yet we had all heard her. The running, the laughter. It was one of the clearest moments of the whole experience, and one of the hardest to rationalize. The most unsettling moment, though, came one week when Lucas's parents went out of town. They asked me to stay in the apartment upstairs to keep an eye on the place. I agreed, thinking it'd be quiet. That night, after closing, I went upstairs and called Lucas to ask what he wanted for dinner. I was holding the phone to my ear with one hand and fumbling with the keys in the other. For some reason, I couldn't unlock the door. "I think the ghosts are locking you out," Lucas joked through the phone. Right after he said that, the call went fuzzy. Not like a dropped signal, something else. Suddenly, we both heard the strange wave of voices, maybe 20 or more, all talking at once. Some were panicked, others almost chanting. None of it made any sense. Then, as suddenly as it started, I managed to unlock the door, and the voices stopped. Complete silence. We hung up not long after. We both knew that wasn't just a bad signal. I was alone for almost an hour that evening, and it was one of the longest hours I've ever felt. Every little creak, every gust of wind against the window, it all made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't want me there. Over the months, there were countless little incidents. Knocking, things falling off shelves, lights flickering. But over time, I got used to it. It stopped bothering me as much. I even suggested they host a paranormal investigation night, just to see what they might catch on camera, or EVP. But Lucas's parents refused. They said they had to live there, and they didn't want to know if something was living there with them. I remember one particular night in early June, back when I was still seeing Emily. We'd gone out for dinner at a cozy little diner just off Main Street, and then caught a late-night movie at the local theater in Silver Springs. By the time I walked her home, the sky had opened up and heavy rain was coming down in sheets. I didn't have a car back then, mostly relied on walking or the bus, so Emily insisted I crash at her place. She lived with her parents in one of those older, two-story homes near the edge of town. It had a lot of charm, but also that creaky, worn-in feeling older houses tend to have. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs and a small den and kitchen on the ground floor. I set myself up on the living room couch, pulled a throw blanket over me, and settled in. For the first couple hours, I slept fine. The quiet ticking of the old mantel clock helped lull me into that cozy half-sleep where dreams start to blend with reality. But out of nowhere, I woke up, not groggy or disoriented, just fully awake, alert. There was no obvious reason, no loud noise, no bad dream. Just this strange awareness, like something had nudged me awake without touching me. I stayed still, listening, trying to convince myself it was nothing. And then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, creaking down the wooden staircase. The stairs emptied right into the living room, so from where I was lying, I had a clear view of the bottom step. I assumed it was Emily's mom or maybe her younger sister, coming down for water or something. But the steps just stopped, right there at the bottom. No one came into view. No sound of the fridge opening. Just silence. I stayed frozen under the blanket, staring at the dark outline of the stairs. The only light in the room came from a soft orange glow of the street lamp outside, filtering through the blinds. It was enough to see the time, 3:24 a.m. Then something happened, something I still can't fully explain. An overwhelming wave of dread rolled over me, like the kind of fear that doesn't come from your mind, but from something deeper, primal. My skin went cold, and I started sweating. Every muscle locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't even shift my head, just my eyes wide open, locked on the glowing digits of the clock. That's when the couch shifted. I felt the cushion beside me sink, as if someone had just sat down, slowly, deliberately. Then came the weight, heavy, pressing down on my legs. Whatever it was started moving, crawling upward, 1 inch at a time, from my knees to my chest, pinning me. I couldn't breathe right. My lungs were tight. My vocal cords wouldn't cooperate. I tried to cry out, but nothing came. Even my thoughts were fuzzy. I wanted to pray, something, anything, but I couldn't even remember the words to the Lord's Prayer. It was like my brain wasn't my own anymore. Then I felt it. A breath. A warm exhale brushing past my ear. And the faintest sound, like a sigh, right there beside me. I don't know how, but something in me broke through. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was faith. In my mind, I screamed, begged for Jesus to help me. And just like that, it snapped. My voice came back, loud and ragged. I screamed and bolted upright, like I'd been yanked out of a nightmare. The weight vanished. The couch was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat there in the dark, staring out the window, waiting for the sun. I never told Emily or her parents. They lived there. What was I supposed to say? But looking back, especially now, after everything, I wish I had, because that night wasn't just some random haunting. It was the beginning of something that's still going on. Something that didn't stay in that house. It followed me. And the second time it showed up, it was worse. See, ever since we were kids, my sister Robin and I have experienced strange things. At first, we didn't think much of it. Little bumps in the night, shadows moving where they shouldn't. But as we got older, things escalated, and we had no one to talk to about it. Our family's always been skeptical, dismissive. Robin's had it the worst. She deals with anxiety now, and while she doesn't talk about it much, I know the hauntings have taken a toll. What scares me most is how this thing seems connected to her somehow. When she's away, like when she's at university out in Boulder, I hardly notice anything weird. But the moment she's back home, that feeling creeps in again, that icy presence, that invisible pressure in the air. One time, I walked into her room just to grab our cat, Luna. I sat down on her bottom bunk and pet her for a while. The TV was playing quietly. The remote was up on the top bunk, nowhere near me. Suddenly, the TV turned off, and then the radio clicked on, blaring at full volume. Luna leaped out of my arms and bolted, and I was right behind her, running downstairs like a kid again. Robin's room stayed cold the whole day after that. Luna wouldn't go back in. Stuff like that kept happening whenever Robin came home. But for her, there was no real escape. Even when she moved into student housing, the presence came with her. At first, everything was normal. Just a regular off-campus house with a few roommates. But not long after she settled in, her room started feeling off, cold, damp. Even when the heater was on, that same sickening energy returned. One weekend, all her roommates were away, and she was alone. That night, she heard a crashing sound echoing from the end of the hallway. Her cat, Alfie, just stood there at the bedroom door, staring, hissing at nothing. She called me, panicking, then called one of her friends nearby. By the time her friend got there, Robin had worked herself into a full-blown panic attack. When she opened her door to go downstairs, she found something just outside. It was a maid's trolley, like the kind you'd see in a hotel, just sitting there. No explanation. More things happened in that house, but the scariest part came later, after she moved in with her boyfriend, Sam. His house was nicer, spacious, quiet, and a better part of town. I stayed with them for a couple weeks that summer. The first night or two felt fine, but after a few days, I started feeling watched, like something unseen was studying me from across the room. One night, Sam and Robin had a small argument. Nothing major, but he went to sleep on the couch downstairs. Robin turned in early. I stayed up, scrolling my phone in bed. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard a deep, dragging sound coming from the second floor, like furniture being shoved across hardwood. It wasn't loud, but it had weight to it, like something heavy was being moved. I crept out of bed, listening. The house was still. Robin's door was shut. Sam was still downstairs. That sound. It didn't make sense, and it wasn't the last time I'd hear it. Whatever this is, it's not tied to a single house. It's tied to us, to Robin, and now I'm starting to worry it's growing stronger. What do you think? Could something like this really follow a person? Have you ever experienced something like it? Let me tell you what happened next. After that terrifying night, I tried calling Emily a bunch of times, but she didn't answer at first. When she finally picked up, her voice was groggy. She said she'd been asleep since around 2 a.m. without hesitation. She came downstairs to stay with me in the guest bedroom. The next morning, we told Jacob everything. But like most people, he didn't buy it. He just laughed it off, said it was probably stress, or maybe a bad dream. But the worst was still coming. After Emily and Jacob patched things up, they decided to start sleeping in their room again. That's when things really spiraled. It was just after 3 in the morning when they were both jolted awake by a loud crash coming from their en-suite bathroom. Jacob ran in first, thinking something had fallen. He came out looking confused, holding his phone flashlight up, mumbling something about the mirror. That mirror had been standing on a shelf since they moved in. Now it was lying face down, several feet across the room. Everything else on the shelf was untouched. Not a single bottle or toothbrush was out of place. The window was shut tight. No breeze, no open vents. There was no reason that mirror should have moved. Emily flipped it over, and that's when we saw it. The glass was split down the middle like a lightning bolt, fractured into jagged, dagger-like shards, as if something had struck it with surgical precision. The air in the house shifted after that. Heavier, colder. It felt like something was watching us. Something angry. A few nights later, one of Emily's friends, Jordan, came to stay. We were trying to lighten the mood, joking around in the living room, watching some late-night reruns. But things turned ugly fast. Emily and Jacob started bickering again. Something small, but it escalated fast. Jordan and I stayed downstairs, trying to ignore it, until we heard Emily scream from upstairs. We bolted up the stairs. Jacob was banging on the locked bathroom door, shouting her name over and over. No answer. He threw his shoulder into it, and the door finally cracked open. Emily was sitting in the dark on the cold tile floor, her back against the bathtub, shaking. Her wrist was bleeding, a deep slice running down her arm. Blood was smeared across the floor, and beside her was a long shard of mirror glass, still slick with red. She kept whispering, "It wasn't me, it wasn't me," over and over like a broken record. We wrapped her arm in a towel and rushed her to the hospital. Even there, in a hospital bed surrounded by bright lights and stereo walls, she repeated the same words. The staff said it was a suicide attempt. But I know my sister. Emily's afraid of paper cuts. She would never hurt herself like that. Not intentionally. I'm telling you, something in that house is turning violent, and I don't think it's done yet. Sorry to interrupt, but if you've made it this far and you're still listening, let me know in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. My name is Mike, and maybe this all sounds strange, but things have been happening to me for years, and I'm starting to think they're all connected. I'm going to tell you everything, and maybe, just maybe, you can help me figure out what's really going on. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. At the end of this past March, my sister Megan, her boyfriend Chris, my husband Jake, and I decided to spend a weekend camping just outside of Pine Hollow, a quiet mountain town tucked into the forests of northern Colorado. Pine Hollow used to be a bustling mining hub back in the late 1800s, back when the Black Rock silver mine attracted swarms of workers, saloon owners, and drifters chasing their fortunes. The history still clings to the place. You can find crumbling cabins and stone chimneys half swallowed by trees, like scars of a past the town hasn't quite buried. The mine shut down in 1972, ending decades where entire families worked generation after generation underground. When the industry dried up, artists, hikers, and spiritual seekers took over, giving the town a strange, laid-back energy. It's the kind of place where every other building has a ghost story behind it, and people casually talk about the spirit in the attic over coffee. After a long day wandering through old trails and abandoned cabins, we headed back to our campground, which sat eerily close to the mine's entrance. To get to our site, we had to walk through the old mine's gravel parking lot, just a chain-link fence between us and that long-sealed shaft. That night we made s'mores by the fire, played some quiet music, and soaked in the peaceful mountain air. Megan and Chris stayed in a tent, while Jake and I settled into our little camper. I left the door unlocked, just in case they needed anything during the night. Like I usually do, I read for a bit under a soft lantern below. When my eyelids started to droop, I turned off the light, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and let the silence settle around me. It was quiet, just the wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the camper as it cooled. Then I heard it. The camper door creaked open, and someone stepped inside. I didn't open my eyes. I figured it was probably Chris, maybe grabbing an extra flashlight or charger. I lay still, waiting to hear what he needed. Heavy footsteps moved slowly down the length of the camper, then paused, before turning and walking back toward the door. The sound of those boots on the floor wasn't casual. They were heavy, intentional, not rushed. Whoever it was never turned on a light. No sounds of rummaging. No whispered apology for waking me. Just footsteps. Then the door opened again, closed. And nothing. I should have sat up, should have checked. But something about the quiet, the calm confidence of those footsteps made me hesitate. I stayed still, the darkness around me thick as velvet. Eventually, I fell asleep again, brushing it off as a midnight visit I'd confirm in the morning. Over breakfast, I asked Megan and Chris what they needed from the camper last night. They both looked confused. "We didn't go in the camper," Megan said, pouring herself coffee. "You sure?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Chris shook his head. "Nope. We were wiped, crawled into the tent, and passed out." I turned to Jake, but he was already laughing. "You know I sleep like the dead," he said. "Didn't hear a thing. But I know what I heard. The slow, deliberate steps. The door opening. The air shifting. And whoever, or whatever, it was never turned on a light. They moved like they knew the layout, like they'd been in that camper before. Or maybe, like they weren't seeing with eyes at all. The only thing I can't stop thinking about. There was no sound of them taking or touching anything. They just walked in, paused, then walked out. A part of me wonders if it was something from the mine. Maybe a long-forgotten worker, curious about the strangers camping so close to where he spent his life. Or maybe something older. Something that's always lived in those hills, watching, waiting. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't drinking. I know what I felt. So what do you think? Could it have been the ghost of a miner, just checking in? Or was it something else entirely? All I know is the footsteps were real, and I haven't camped near an old mine since. Let me tell you about something that happened to me back in 2003. I had just moved into a newly built home on the edge of a small, quiet town called Silver Springs, tucked along the base of the Appalachian foothills in western North Carolina. It was a peaceful little place, rolling hills, cool mountain air, and those wide, open skies that turn lavender in the evenings. Coming from Charlotte, it was a slower pace than I was used to. At night, the only sounds were the rustling trees and the occasional call of an owl from the woods behind the property. The house itself sat on what used to be farmland, mostly tobacco and corn, from what I was told. There was no real history to it. Nothing creepy. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just fresh drywall, new appliances, and that faint smell of paint and lumber still clinging to the air. It felt like a clean slate. By the start of 2004, I decided to get a roommate to help with the mortgage. My friend Sarah moved in, bringing along her little white terrier, Biscuit. Things went smoothly at first. She settled in, Biscuit made himself at home, and we got into a nice rhythm. One weekend, I had to head out of town for a family gathering, and Sarah offered to take care of my ferret, Pepper. When I got back late Sunday night, Sarah was in the living room with a book and a cup of tea. Everything seemed normal, until she hesitated and told me something strange. While lying in bed the night before, she'd heard loud thuds coming from my bedroom, like boxes being tossed around, and then what sounded like scratching. Thinking Pepper had escaped her cage, she went to check. But when she opened the door, the room was exactly how I'd left it, and Pepper was curled up and sound asleep. She returned to her room, but the noises started again. A second check revealed nothing had changed. After that, the sound stopped completely. I brushed it off at the time. Maybe the house was settling, or maybe Pepper had been restless and she just matured. About a week later, something else happened, something harder to explain. We were both jolted awake around 5 a.m. by the doorbell ringing over and over again. Sarah was already in the kitchen with Biscuit barking his head off. "There's no one out there," she said, peeking through the curtains. We both stood at the window, watching the empty front porch while the doorbell kept going off, relentless and eerie in the morning silence. Finally, I got a step stool and disconnected it. Figured it was just a glitch, but the whole thing left us both a little shaken. Then came the worst part. A few days later, Sarah pounded on my bedroom door before dawn. Her voice was shaky. "You need to come see this." I followed her into the kitchen, where Biscuit stood frozen, refusing to step past the doorway, whining softly. I didn't get it at first. Then I looked down, and my stomach turned. The linoleum floor was crawling. Thousands of maggots, wriggling and squirming in every direction. They weren't coming from the trash, or the drain, or anything I could see. They were just there, covering the floor like a living carpet. Sarah ran to the bathroom and threw up. I grabbed a broom and started sweeping them into a trash bag, working as fast as I could. It took almost an hour, and once they were gone, it was like they had never existed. No source, no smell, nothing. I ended up talking to Father Langston, the priest at my church in town. He didn't hesitate. He believed we were dealing with something dark. He said sometimes spirits get attached to people or even objects they bring with them. He suggested we have the house blessed. I agreed. A man from the church came over a few days later. He specialized in spiritual cleansing, used to assist with exorcisms. According to Father Langston, he walked through every room, murmuring prayers in Latin, flicking holy water on the doorframes and windows. He placed street Benedict medals in the corners of the house and hung a small crucifix above my bed. After that, everything stopped. Well, mostly. For a while, I'd still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I heard the doorbell ringing, but I'd remind myself it was still unplugged, and slowly, even that faded. The peace returned. A couple of months later, while working at my job at a local wellness spa, I had a client who happened to mention something that made my skin crawl. She was talking about her mother, an older woman who lived a few towns over, and said that one night her mother had walked into her kitchen and found the entire floor covered in maggots, just like mine. No explanation, no source. The timing lined up almost exactly. She even mentioned that her mother had removed every religious symbol from the house at the advice of a friend, hoping it would help. But it didn't. I didn't share my own story with her. I just listened, frozen, nodding. To this day, I don't know what that was. Was it something attached to Sarah? Something drawn to the house? Or maybe both? All I know is that after the blessing, things quieted down. The doorbell works fine now. The house is still, safe. But sometimes, I'll catch myself hesitating at the kitchen doorway in the early morning light, half expecting to hear that soft, wet sound of something squirming on the floor. What do you think it was? Let me tell you about something that happened back in November of 2005, something that still gives me chills, even now. My daughter was just 2 months old at the time when she caught a cold. Nothing too serious at first, just some congestion and restlessness, but I was on high alert. I stayed by her side constantly, watching for any signs of it getting worse. I kept wondering if I should take her to the hospital. It was a long drive, almost 30 miles from our home in rural Pine Hollow, Indiana, but she didn't have a fever yet, and I figured maybe it was best to let the cold pass on its own. That all changed around midnight. I woke up to check on her and immediately knew something was wrong. Her skin was burning hot, and she was so weak she couldn't even cry. I didn't have a thermometer, but you don't need one when your gut tells you it's serious. I gave her some infant Tylenol, hoping it would help, but I just couldn't sit around waiting. I rushed to wake my sister, and we bundled the baby up and got in the car. The drive to the hospital felt like it lasted forever. It was cold, dark, and the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. After we got there, we waited and waited. Hours passed, but thankfully, her fever slowly came down while we were there. At one point, I almost convinced myself it was safe to go home, but I needed answers. So we waited until a doctor finally saw her. By 4:00 a.m., he reassured us everything was okay. No infections, no complications, just a bad cold. I can't describe the relief. Around 4:40, We packed up and began the long drive back through the pitch-black country roads. And that's when something happened. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed a figure on the side of the road, maybe 50 or 60 feet ahead. I eased off the gas. Out in Pine Hollow, it's not uncommon to see deer or the occasional loose horse near the road, especially before sunrise. At first, I thought it was two animals standing side by side, but as our headlights swept across the scene, the shape came into focus, and it wasn't animals. It was a young woman. She looked to be in her mid-20s and was standing there with her thumb out like she was trying to hitch a ride. But what really threw me off was how she was dressed. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, ankle length, almost like something out of a Civil War reenactment. A shawl was draped around her shoulders, and she wore a pale blue ribbon in her dark hair, which was tied back in a neat low bun. Everything about her felt wrong. Not just old-fashioned, but out of place, like she'd stepped out of a different century. And it was 5:00 a.m. on a freezing November morning. I slowed the car as we passed, and my sister leaned forward to get a better look. We were both silent, just watching her in disbelief. Her expression was blank, but her eyes seemed to follow us as we drove by. I didn't stop. I didn't even think about it. The whole moment felt heavy, off. A few seconds later, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone. No trees nearby, no ditches, no places she could have hidden that fast. Just empty road behind us. My stomach dropped. My hands tightened on the wheel. My sister didn't say a word for a long time. When we got home, I told our mom about what we saw. She listened carefully, then said something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She told us that years ago, before the county paved that road, there had been a small farmhouse tucked away in that same stretch of land. A young woman lived there with her mother. She got sick. Some said it was pneumonia, and died in her 20s. She was buried on the property. No headstone, just a small wooden cross that's long gone by now. And the spot where we saw that woman, it was less than 100 feet from where that old house once stood. We both believe it was her. Maybe she was trying to get home. Maybe she didn't know she was gone. Or maybe she was warning us. I don't know. All I know is I can still picture her face every time I drive that road. That quiet stare. That eerie calm. What do you think she wanted? Have you ever seen something that just didn't belong? Something that made your blood run cold? It's me, Rachel, back with another unsettling experience from my dad's house in Silver Springs. I know I once said I'd never spend another night there again, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Last Thursday, September 6th, my dad came down with a nasty illness, and he really needed help around the house. My husband, Adam, and I offered to stay overnight, just to help out with meals, cleaning, the basics. What happened that night, though, I don't think I'll ever forget. That evening, once we'd settled in, I took a sleeping pill hoping for a full night's rest. At first, everything seemed calm. But then, right at 3:12 a.m., I jolted awake, gasping for breath. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I sat up in bed and called out for Adam, who was already awake. "What's wrong?" he asked, and I could barely get the words out. "It feels like the house is on fire." His eyes widened. "Yeah, it smells like smoke, like burning wood." Panicked, we leaped out of bed. My dad has an old fireplace in the living room, so we ran to check it, half expecting to find flames licking the walls. But everything was normal. No fire, no smoke, no heat, just that lingering scent in the air, faint but unmistakable. It didn't make sense. The feeling in that moment, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Thick, suffocating, unreal. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it was just a strange coincidence. Maybe the sleeping pill was messing with my head. We tried to go back to bed, but not long after, Adam got up to use the bathroom. He stepped into the hallway and came rushing back seconds later, pale as a sheet. "There's someone in your brother's old room," he whispered. I heard voices, talking, cursing. But when I got to the door, it stopped. Dead silence. I sat upright, heart pounding. That room had always felt wrong. And growing up, my brother used to mess around with a Ouija board in there. A lot. Adam looked shaken. I told myself it had to be my imagination. I don't even believe in this stuff, he said. But then, something grabbed me. It felt like a hand clamped down on my shoulder and shoved me forward. His voice cracked. I'm telling you, something's after me. He burst back into the room, yelling, waking up the whole house. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face as we told him everything. The burning smell, the tightness in our chests, the voices, the unseen force. And then, my dad said something I never expected. There's something evil in this house. I stared at him stunned. For years, I'd told him about the strange things I'd seen and heard growing up. The whispers, the footsteps, the shadows. But he always brushed it off. And now, he was admitting it. He told us what had been happening to him lately. The TV turning on and off by itself. Pots and pans crashing in the kitchen, only to walk in and find everything untouched. And then, just a few days earlier, he'd walked past my brother's old room and heard multiple voices whispering his name. Pete, they said, over and over, louder and louder. Different tones, different pitches, as if there were several people speaking at once. Terrified but determined, my dad shouted, "Who's in there?" "I've got a gun." No answer. He pushed against the door. It wouldn't budge. He rammed it hard. Finally, it gave way, and the smell that hit him made his stomach turn. Rotten, like something dead. He reached for the light switch, and the bulb instantly blew out, plunging the room into total darkness. He slammed the door shut and started to pray. He told us, voice low, "I haven't been that scared in my life." Some people think my brother might have opened a doorway when he played with that board. A portal. And maybe something dark, something lost or angry, came through. Something that never left. Since then, my dad invited someone from his church to bless the place. They walked through every room with holy water, read scriptures, lit candles, and prayed for peace. But I'm not sure it'll be enough. Not really. Because deep down, I still feel it. The house isn't quiet. Not really. I only hope whatever's trapped there can someday find its way out. Realize they're no longer part of this world. That they don't belong here anymore. That it's time to move on. But until then, I think this house will never truly sleep. Have you ever stayed somewhere that just felt wrong? Like the walls were watching? Because sometimes, I wonder if the house remembers more than we think. When I visited my dad last fall in Silver Springs, Nevada, we got to talking late one night, just the two of us, sipping coffee on the back porch. The conversation drifted, like it always does, into strange experiences and eerie memories. That's when he brought up the head in the trash can. I'd known about it since I was a kid, but I'd never really pressed him for the full story, until that night. What he told me chilled me to my core. He said it happened during a blistering summer in the early 70s, when he was just 13. They were living in a small desert town near the Arizona border, the kind of place where the roads crack from the heat and the air hums with cicadas. Back then, kids played outside until the streetlights buzzed on. That day, he and a few friends were tossing a rubber baseball around in the street when it bounced off his glove and rolled toward the curb. The ball hit the side of a dented metal trash can, the old kind with the tin lid that always rattled in the wind. Out of habit, he peeked inside as he reached for the ball. He said he used to do that a lot, looking for old toys or cool junk people tossed out. But this time, it wasn't a toy he found. He froze. At first, he thought it was a prank, maybe a Halloween prop or some gruesome mannequin head. But the more he stared, the more real it looked. The skin was grayed, the mouth slightly parted, and then he recognized the face. It was their neighbor, Mrs. Desai, a kind, soft-spoken woman from down the street who always offered him iced tea in the summer and let him pet her dog. Her eyes were still open. He bolted back to the house, yelling for my grandma. She brushed him off at first. thinking it was another one of his dumb pranks. He'd always been the jokester in the family, but something in his voice got through to her. She followed him outside, muttering that if this was a trick, he'd be grounded for a month. When she lifted the lid, she screamed. My grandma nearly collapsed on the driveway. My dad had to steady her as she cried out, her voice cracking. Moments later, she was on the phone with the police, hands trembling as she described what they'd seen. The cops arrived fast. Within minutes, they forced open the door to Mrs. Desai's little stucco house. What they found inside was nightmare fuel. Her boyfriend, quiet, pale, and oddly calm, was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. In the bathroom, her body was in the tub, headless. When the officers questioned him, he said she was just soaking, as if everything was fine. He admitted, without hesitation, that he still lay beside her at night. She likes the company, he told them. My dad said the horror didn't end when the sirens faded. For weeks after, he couldn't sleep. He'd lie awake at night, eyes wide, heart pounding, and then he'd hear her voice, clear as day, Steve. It echoed through the hallway, always coming from somewhere just out of reach. He swore it wasn't a dream. He was awake, fully awake, when he heard her. Then the sightings began. Not just him. My grandma, too. They'd catch glimpses of something drifting past doorways, a pale face floating just above eye level, lips slightly parted, hair clinging to her cheeks. She would appear in mirrors, behind curtains, in the corners of rooms, always silent, always watching, and then she'd vanish. My dad said it felt like she was looking for something, or maybe someone, and he believed it was him, because he was the one who found her, the one who uncovered the truth. For nearly 3 weeks, their lives were a waking nightmare. Doors creaked open on their own. Lights flickered. Whispers snuck into the silence of the house. My grandma became a shell of herself, constantly glancing over her shoulder. She kept salt by every windowsill and prayed aloud every night, begging for the spirit to leave them in peace. Eventually, they couldn't take it anymore. One afternoon, without packing much, they loaded what they could into the car and left that house behind. They never went back, not even to collect the rest of their things. Even now, decades later, my dad still lowers his voice when he talks about it. He says he feels guilt, not just for finding her, but for being the reason her soul might still be wandering. He often wonders, did she ever find peace, or is she still drifting somewhere, headless, whispering his name? I don't know what haunted me more, his story, or the way he looked when he told it. Have you ever heard a voice call your name when no one else was home? It started when I was barely old enough to talk. My mom used to call me an old soul, saying I had a way of seeing the world that didn't quite fit a child my age. She loved telling the story about the time she caught me rummaging through her closet when I was just 3. When she asked what I was looking for, I apparently shrugged and said, "You'll understand when you're as old as I am." She swears to this day that I said it just like that, with a kind of seriousness that didn't belong on a toddler's face. But the thing I remember most vividly from those early years was the boy I used to play with. Back then, everyone assumed he was just an imaginary friend. I accepted that too, at least for a while. But he wasn't like the make-believe buddies other kids talked about. He changed as I grew up. He aged with me. That's not something I could ever explain. When I got older, old enough to know I shouldn't still have imaginary friends, he stopped showing up when I was awake. Instead, he started visiting me in my dreams. No matter what was going on in my life, he was always there. He laughed with me when things were good, and when I had nightmares, he fought by my side like he was protecting me. He had thick, tousled brown hair, honey hazel eyes, and this crooked little smile that made me feel safe, even when the world didn't. Then, one day, he just stopped appearing. The dreams faded. I figured maybe I had shut him out, unintentionally, while trying to deal with everything else life threw at me. I told myself it was part of growing up, but still, it felt like losing a friend. A very real one. When I was 18, my grandmother passed away. She lived in this old weathered house at the edge of Pine Hollow, the kind of place with creaky floorboards and a front porch that moaned under your feet. After she was gone, I had a dream where we were walking together down the gravel path near the old brick schoolhouse across from her place. That path was real. It always smelled like pine needles and fresh grain. In the dream, we were talking quietly when I heard footsteps running behind us, crunching on the gravel. My grandmother stopped and turned, smiling like she already knew who it was. I looked over, and there he was, the boy. Only now, he wasn't a boy anymore. He looked about my age, taller, his features sharper, but those same honey hazel eyes, that same crooked smile. I turned to my grandmother and asked if she knew him. Her answer gave me chills. Yes, sweetheart, I know him, and soon you will too. I thought I already did know him. Then I noticed what he was holding, my baby blanket. It was pale yellow with little blue rocking horses and old-fashioned teddy bears. My grandmother had made it for me herself, and I still kept it tucked safely in a box in my closet. He wrapped it gently around her shoulders and told me he had to go for now, but he'd be back. They walked away together, down the hill and into the trees, fading like mist into the shadows. I never told my parents about that dream. My dad was still deep in grief, and my mom, well, she adored my grandmother like her own. I didn't want to add to their pain, but that dream stuck with me. Why did he have my baby blanket? And what did my grandmother mean by "you'll know him soon"? When he appeared again in another dream, I asked him his name. He smiled, kind of sadly, and said, "I was never given one." That didn't make sense. I was sure I used to call him something as a kid, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember it. Every imaginary friend I ever had a name, but not him. Then one night, my mom and I were watching the news. There was a story about a woman who'd miscarried, and out of nowhere, my mom got really quiet. I asked if she was okay. That's when she told me. "You know you're a rainbow baby, right?" She said, her voice trembling. "I had a miscarriage before I got pregnant with you. Just 3 months along, then you came." I just sat there stunned. The room felt like it was tilting. I asked if she knew whether it was a boy. She shook her head. No tests were done that early. Then I asked what she would have named him. She paused and said, "I always liked Ian, or Vincent." That night, I dreamt of him again. He looked different, sadder, like he'd been waiting for something he couldn't quite ask for. I told him about what Mom had said. I told him I was angry, that I wished I'd known sooner. Then I looked at him and said, "Your name is Ian Vincent." He smiled, brighter than I'd ever seen, and said he liked it. "I knew you'd choose well," he said softly. Then he promised he'd visit again soon. Since then, I've come to accept what most people never even consider. The boy I grew up with wasn't imaginary. He was my brother, the one who never got to be born, the one I somehow still got to know. He would have been like a twin to me, and even though he didn't get to stay, I got to share something with him that defies explanation. I even created his image using some photomorphing software, one as the kid I remembered playing with, and another as the young man he is now. The resemblance to my own features is haunting, and still comes to me in dreams. He's helped me through heartbreak, anxiety, even self-doubt. I think he always will. Just like Grandma said, I knew him, and I still do. I gave birth to my daughter on a cold Monday afternoon, February 22nd, 1993, at exactly 2:01 p.m. The pregnancy hadn't been easy. I dealt with relentless morning sickness for all 9 months and barely gained 11 pounds. Because of that, I was classified as high risk. We were induced at 36 weeks when the doctors noticed she wasn't growing as she should. I was terrified, but after 4 long hours of labor, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl with 10 tiny fingers and lungs strong enough to shake the walls. Everything seemed okay, until it wasn't. About 3 hours later, my body began to betray me. I started hemorrhaging fast. My blood pressure plummeted, and things became a blur of worried voices and sterile white light. A nurse named Wendy stayed by my side, injecting Pitocin every half hour, trying to stop the bleeding. but nothing was working. I felt myself slipping away, like I was watching everything from behind a thick sheet of glass. And yet, I wasn't afraid. Just calm. Numb. Wendy gently touched my arm and said her shift was ending. "I'll check on you tomorrow morning," she promised. At 6:00 p.m., a new nurse walked in. She was shorter than most, maybe 5 feet tall, with streaks of gray in her cropped brown hair and startling blue eyes that seemed to shine in the dim light. Her name tag said Maria. Her voice was soft, warm, calming in a way I can't describe. I assumed she was there to give me another dose, so I mustered all the strength I had and rolled onto my side. But she just smiled. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "you don't need another shot. You're going to be just fine." She sat on the edge of my bed, gently rubbing my legs. Her hands were warm, steady. She didn't say much after that, just stayed with me. It felt like time stood still. I turned toward my husband, planning to ask if he'd heard her, but he was fast asleep in the recliner beside me. I glanced at the wall clock. 6:05. Maria stood, gave my leg a reassuring pat, and smiled one last time before heading for the door. But here's the thing, I never saw her open it. She was just gone. I blinked, looked back at the clock. 6:06. I called out to my husband. Nothing. I tossed a plastic thermometer at him. It bounced off his chest, but he didn't even flinch. Just then, another nurse came in. Her name was Sheila. She had a syringe in her hand. I told her I didn't need it, that Maria had already been in to check on me. Sheila paused, looking puzzled. "Maria?" she asked. I described her, the short woman, gray in her hair, blue eyes. Sheila's face changed completely. Her voice dropped. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm your only nurse tonight." Before I could respond, she rushed out and returned with 2 other nurses, their expressions tense. They began questioning me rapid fire. When I mentioned Maria again, one of them glanced nervously at the other. I panicked. Was someone pretending to be a nurse? Was my baby safe? My voice rose until I was yelling, finally snapping my husband out of his deep sleep. He looked around, dazed. "What's going on?" he asked. "Why is it so cold in here?" He swore he'd been awake the whole time, just sitting there when the room suddenly turned freezing cold. And then the next thing he remembered, I was yelling, and the nurses were standing around him. Sheila assured me my baby was fine, but her tone was softer now. Another nurse, an older woman named Sarah, came to sit beside me. She checked my blood pressure, smiled gently, and told Sheila to put the syringe away. "She doesn't need another shot," she said. "Call her doctor." Then Sarah asked if this was my first baby. I told her it was my 4th, and she chuckled. We talked about my older kids, our favorite baby names, even what it felt like to hold a newborn again. Just as it seemed like Sarah was about to tell me something important, my doctor walked in. He looked at me like he didn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Your vitals are stable," he said. "Your color's back. You hungry?" "Starving," I replied. He smiled. "I'll have them order you a pizza." After he left, Sarah leaned in a little closer. "You know," she said softly, "I've never actually spoken to anyone Maria's visited." A strange chill ran up my spine. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, then looked down, almost as if in prayer. "Maria was a maternity nurse here, years ago. She passed during a snowstorm on her way to a night shift. Never made it. But every now and then, when things get bad, really bad, someone will say she came to visit." She rubbed my leg, just like Maria had done, and smiled. "They say she only shows up for special people." The next day, to everyone's surprise, I was discharged in perfect health. As my husband and I walked out with our daughter in our arms, I noticed the whispers, the nurses who glanced at me like I'd seen something they hadn't. Maybe they thought I imagined it. Maybe they were just afraid to believe it. But I know what I saw. Maria was there. And when I needed her most, she brought peace. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've been a Christian my whole life, and I truly believe God gave me a spiritual gift, one that most people wouldn't want. I can sense spirits, not just feel them, but discern whether they're good or evil. Ever since I was a kid, that sense has never failed me, but it's come at a price. Years of fear that clings like smoke after a fire. I've experienced things most people would struggle to even imagine, and while I've gotten more used to these encounters over time, the presence of something evil still brings a kind of fear that reaches deep into your bones. It shakes you, makes you question everything, except for Him. God's protection has always been the only thing that's carried me through, especially during what happened at my great-grandmother's old house in Pine Hollow, North Carolina. Now this wasn't one of those towering haunted mansions you see in movies. It was just a small one-story home on a quiet street, built in the 1950s by my great-grandparents. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary, normal, even warm, and for most of my childhood, it felt that way, filled with laughter, Sunday dinners, and stories on the porch. There were no tragic deaths that I knew of, no murders, no local legends tied to it. But as I later found out, that house had secrets. My great-grandfather had been unfaithful during his marriage. There were rumors, whispered stories about wild house parties they used to throw in the 60s, lots of booze, a few questionable guests, and some things better left unsaid. And there was another presence that cast a shadow, even long after he was gone. My great-great-grandfather, an atheist who openly mocked religion. People said he was brilliant but arrogant, and unsettling to be around. He was a painter, and several others in our family inherited his creative streak, including my great-uncle, who practically worshipped him and adopted his bitter disbelief in God. I didn't think much of any of that when I started staying over at the house during college. I'd drive in every Friday night and stay through Monday morning, just to keep my great-grandma company. She was too old to be on her own, and I genuinely enjoyed our time together. It was quiet, simple. At first, it felt peaceful, but then the nights started to feel off. It's hard to explain, just this heavy, creeping feeling that would settle in my chest after the sun went down, like something unseen was watching. I'd brush it off, tell myself I was just tired or stressed from school, but that didn't stop the dreams. They started subtle. A strange version of my great-grandmother, her eyes vacant, speaking in a voice that wasn't hers. Then it got darker. In one dream, my little dachshund, who always stayed with me, spoke to me in a low, hateful tone. He told me horrible things, accused me of things I'd never done. I always woke up drenched in sweat, and always, at exactly 3 a.m. I told myself it was just coincidence. Maybe my subconscious was acting up. But the fear didn't fade with morning light. It stayed, clung to me like a second skin, and I didn't dare tell anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy. The more weekends I spent there, the worse it got. I barely slept. My nerves were fried. I started taking Tylenol PM every night just to fall asleep, but after a while, even that didn't help. And then things started happening when I was awake. Lights would flicker the moment I walked into a room. Kitchen lights, hallway sconces, even the bathroom nightlight. At first, I chalked it up to bad wiring, but it wasn't just the house. It happened at my dorm, at the grocery store, at my mom's, everywhere. I couldn't ignore it anymore. And then came the nights, the ones that made me dread even closing my eyes. I'd hear thumps and loud bangs from empty rooms. The old TV in the living room would switch on by itself at 2 or 3 in the morning, blaring static like it was trying to drown out the silence. Lamps would flicker or flash without warning, and when I did manage to sleep, the nightmares only grew worse. And then, something began to shake my bed. I don't mean subtle movement. I mean a violent, jolting shake that made me sit up gasping. I remember lying there, frozen, too scared to move, too scared to scream. And then, I heard it. A voice, not outside, but inside my head. Calm, but clear. Say Jesus. I was terrified. My lips barely worked, but I whispered it, Jesus. And immediately, something slammed me down into the mattress. Something unseen, heavy and hateful. It felt like darkness had crawled up onto my chest, like malice had taken form. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. That night broke something in me. I grabbed my keys, left my sleeping great-grandmother behind, and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just drove through Pine Hollow's empty streets until dawn, windows down, radio off, trying to feel anything but the fear that had wrapped itself around my soul. After that, everything changed. I withdrew from friends, family, everyone. I didn't know how to talk about it. How do you explain that you're being haunted by something that hates not just you, but your faith? Because every time I opened the Bible or tried to pray, the feeling got worse. The shadows felt darker, the air heavier, like the very act of calling on God made it angry. I endured this torment for 2 years, 2 years of barely sleeping, of clinging to what little faith I had left while something tried to break me from the inside out. And the last few weekends I spent in that house, they were the worst. One Saturday night, I noticed my dog acting strange. She was usually relaxed, but that night she was pacing, whining, jumping at every creak in the floorboards. I gave her a treat, tried to calm her down, then took my usual dose of Tylenol PM and collapsed into bed. I woke up, heart racing, from yet another awful dream. This one with my dog possessed, screaming curses in a voice I didn't recognize. My eyes shot open, and of course, it was 3:00 a.m. My dog was curled against me, trembling. She looked up with wide, terrified eyes. I reached out to soothe her, and stopped. The bed was wet. She had peed herself. This dog, trained since she was a puppy, was so scared she lost control. And in that moment I knew whatever had been tormenting me had turned its attention to her. That was the last night I ever stayed in that house. I was shaking all over as I scooped up my trembling golden retriever and stepped into the guest room to change out of my soiled clothes. The house was unusually quiet, but the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. I moved fast, throwing on clean clothes and mentally preparing to leave again. But something about this time felt different, heavier, like a part of me had finally cracked under the pressure. As I fumbled with my zipper, I heard it, a sound drifting from the den we just fled. At first, it was faint, almost ignorable. I tried not to focus on it, convincing myself it was just the house settling. But it kept going. A whistle. Not just any whistle, but the kind you use when calling a dog, slow and deliberate. My blood ran cold. Something was in that room, something calling to my dog. I nearly collapsed from the nausea that washed over me. I didn't stop to process it. I grabbed her, slammed the door behind us, and fled. We drove aimlessly through the streets of Pine Lake until the first light of morning broke through the windshield. That should have been the last time I stepped foot in that house. But for some reason, maybe guilt, maybe pride, I went back one last weekend. I told myself it was to prove something, but deep down, I think I just didn't want to leave unfinished business behind. From the moment I pulled into the gravel driveway, I felt it again, that familiar weight in my chest. I even considered pretending to be sick to get out of it, but I couldn't bring myself to lie to Grandma. Up until that point, everything I'd experienced had been strange but subtle. Flickering lights, footsteps in empty hallways, that deep, gnawing feeling that something was watching me. But that weekend changed everything. It started off quietly. The air in the house felt denser, almost electric. I had a stack of homework to finish, so I set up my textbooks and laptop on the kitchen counter. My binder was among them, always tightly shut because the reins were nearly impossible to open. I avoided it when I could. Later that day, as I walked back through the kitchen, something stopped me in my tracks. The binder was wide open. The stubborn metal reins had been pried apart, pages scattered like someone had rifled through them. My stomach dropped. I hadn't touched it, and there was no way my frail grandmother could have managed those reins. I didn't panic, not this time. I was furious. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of whatever was in that house. I was sick of it. Night fell, and my anxiety ramped up. I read Psalm 91 aloud, whispered prayers into the corners of the room, and tried to shake the growing tension, but the air felt thick, like walking through fog made of static. I entered the den where my grandma was knitting and my dog was curled up on the rug. As I crossed the doorway, something flickered in the corner of my eye. Not a person, not even a shape, just motion. Something huge and shapeless moving in the shadows. My dog sprang to her feet, barking like a wild animal, growling at the corner with a ferocity I'd never seen in her. My grandma looked up, startled, clearly shaken, though I didn't say anything. She felt it too. I barely made it through the evening. My nerves were shot, but for some reason, I felt bold, defiant. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life anymore. I took my Tylenol PM, prayed with clenched fists, and crawled into bed beside my dog. As if on cue, I was jolted awake at exactly 3:00 a.m. My dog launched off the bed, barking like mad. The air in the room buzzed with that same low, evil frequency, like a static charge crawling along my skin. But I didn't freeze this time. I sat up, my heart pounding, and shouted into the darkness, "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave this house." I kept repeating it, louder each time. My voice trembled, but I refused to stop. Whatever was there tried to push back. I could feel the pressure, almost like a hand over my mouth. But I fought harder, calling out the name with every ounce of breath I had. From the other room, my dog's barks turned savage, deep, guttural snarls like she was locked in a fight with something. I couldn't look. I ran. Down the hall, past the den, out the front door into the freezing air. My dog bolted after me, her fur standing on end. We didn't go back. That was it, my breaking point. I never told my grandmother what really happened. People had whispered about the house for years, and she even mentioned odd things now and then. But I realized no one had seen what I had. Maybe they were too scared to talk. Months later, I started connecting the dots. I remembered that my great-uncle had lived there before. A quiet man, obsessed with his grandfather, an atheist who had dabbled in all kinds of strange beliefs. My uncle followed in his footsteps. And then, one day, I found a box buried in the back of the upstairs closet. It was filled with unsettling objects, a crude voodoo doll with nails in its chest, a shrine with blackened candles, and a photograph of his grandfather surrounded by strange markings. I stood there in the dim attic light, holding a piece of pure darkness in my hands. He had invited something into that house, and it never left. I drove the box deep into the woods outside town, doused it in lighter fluid, and watched it burn. Then I returned home and did what I should have done long ago. I blessed the house, room by room, wall to wall. I walked through with my Bible and a bottle of anointing oil, praying out loud, rebuking anything unholy in the name of Jesus. The air changed as I went, the heaviness lifting, the silence softening. When I finished, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean. That experience scared me in ways I still carry, but it taught me something too. Fear only has power when we feed it. Evil can scream, scratch, and try to claim space, but it doesn't get the final word. And if you're wondering whether it ever came back, let's just say I keep the Bible near my bed now, and I don't ignore strange sounds anymore. Have you ever lived somewhere that felt wrong? Somewhere that didn't want you there? Because I have, and I still wonder if it's truly over. I spent a good part of my teenage years and early 20s babysitting for my cousins while my aunt and uncle traveled for work. They lived in a quiet little town outside Silver Springs, Oregon, a place where the nights felt a little too still and the silence crept in like fog. One particular night, when my cousin Lily was around 2 or 3 years old, I had just tucked her into bed. My aunt and uncle had left early to catch a red-eye flight, and the house felt even quieter than usual. I'd barely crawled in beside Lily when she suddenly sat upright. Her eyes locked on a spot near the foot of the bed. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I whispered for her to lie back down, but she stayed still, completely transfixed. Then she said, in a calm, almost annoyed voice, "Sissy, who's that white lady?" I blinked. "What white lady?" She let out a tiny huff, like I was being slow on purpose. "The white lady, in the white dress, standing right there." She was pointing directly at the foot of the bed. My stomach dropped. I didn't look. I couldn't. I gently pulled her down and wrapped my arms around her. We stayed that way until morning, hidden beneath the blankets like they could protect us from whatever Lily saw. That wasn't the only strange thing about her. She had this odd habit of waving and shouting, "Hey there," every time we passed a cemetery. Thing was, she couldn't even see out the car window from her car seat, so there was no way she knew where we were. My uncle swore I taught her that as a prank, but I hadn't. I was just as confused and creeped out as he was. Years later, when I had my daughter, Mia, she had her own share of moments. As a baby, I'd rock her in a recliner facing away from the front door. She had this habit of craning her neck to look behind me and saying, "Grandpa." Every single time, within a few minutes, my dad would pull into the driveway on his way home from work. She always knew before we heard his truck. Then one morning, when she was about 18 months old, I went in to get her from her crib. She smiled up at me, half asleep, and said in this dreamy little voice, "Jesus is coming today." I froze. I didn't know if she meant it like kids say strange things, or if she somehow knew something I didn't. Either way, I kept her close all day, and the baby I was watching too, just in case. When Mia turned 5, she told me she had hallucinated a black cat running across her bed and out of her room. She even brought it up at her pediatric appointment. The doctor chuckled and said, "You don't even know what hallucinate means." Mia, hands on her hips like a tiny lawyer, shot back, "Yes, I do. It means I saw it, but it wasn't really there." He laughed. I did too. She'd been speaking in full sentences since before she was out of diapers, so her sass didn't surprise me. Honestly, I could share a dozen more stories about her, but I think this one's enough for now. Then there's my nephew, Camden. When he was little, he had all kinds of imaginary friends, but there were 3 that stood out. The first was the Red Man. Camden spoke about him with this weird sense of importance, like the Red Man was someone to respect or fear. One day, when Camden was about 2, he yelled at the Red Man to stop dancing on top of the entertainment center because it was blocking the TV. He even told his mom to make him stop like she could. The second one came after a tragedy. When Camden was 3, my great-aunt and great-uncle were murdered during a home invasion and buried in our family's private plot just outside town. Camden barely knew them. We only saw them at Christmas, but soon after their deaths, he started talking about a new friend he called the White Man. He'd mentioned the White Man like he was real, talking about their conversations and the things he said. At a family cookout not long after, Camden picked up a photo of my great-aunt and uncle from the memorial table and pointed. "Look, Mama, it's the White Man." The whole yard went silent. It felt like the world held its breath. But the strangest one was Jung Glow. That was the name Camden gave his third and most persistent imaginary friend. He'd talk about Jung Glow constantly, what games they played, what he said, where he was hiding. One day, I realized I hadn't heard the name in a while. When I asked Camden about it, he said, "I don't like Jung Glow anymore." "Why not?" I asked. "He's mean," Camden replied, glancing toward the window. "He's up in the tree. He listens to us." I felt my skin crawl. I asked what Jung Glow looked like. "He's red," Camden said. "He's got a big belly 'cause he drinks too much sugar, and his ears stick out, like this." He pointed 2 fingers up from his forehead, like horns. We didn't hear about Jung Glow after that. Years later, Mia and I were in a movie theater watching a horror flick. At one point, a demon's name was said, and both of us froze. It sounded eerily close to Jung Glow. We looked at each other, wide-eyed. A friend leaned over and asked what was wrong, but we didn't answer. Later, we heard the name again and realized it wasn't quite the same. Just close. Mia whispered, "Maybe Camden said it wrong because he was little." The thought still gives me chills. I haven't looked at the trees outside the same way since. Let me tell you about what happened last weekend. My husband, my brother, his girlfriend, and I booked a 2-night stay at the Waverly Inn, a historic hotel tucked away in Pine Hollow, Oregon. It's one of those creaky old places with a haunted reputation, perfect for a weekend getaway filled with stories and maybe a little scare. We stayed in room 104, which supposedly used to belong to the original owner back when the building served as a private sanatorium. They say he experimented on patients in the basement and never really left. Our first night, we stayed up way too late exploring. Around 3:30 in the morning, we grabbed our phones and wandered the dimly lit halls, snapping photos near rooms rumored to have paranormal activity. I took dozens of pictures, hoping to catch something, anything, out of the ordinary. We spent nearly an hour outside room 221, where people say a spirit named Marcus likes to play tricks on guests. I talked out loud to him, asking for a sign or maybe a little mischief. My husband and brother both swore they saw green orbs flickering around me, but I didn't feel or see anything myself. A little disappointed, we headed back to our room. That's when something strange happened. As I pulled back the sheets to crawl into bed, I felt something under my pillow. It was a deck of playing cards, one we'd left earlier on the desk by the window. I figured someone was trying to mess with me. Maybe a harmless joke, right? I put the deck back on the desk, shrugged it off, and went to sleep. The next morning, we got a late start. We skipped housekeeping and went downtown to check out antique shops, grab coffee, and wander through the foggy little streets. None of us thought about the cards again until we came back that night. The cards were no longer on the desk. Instead, they'd been dealt into 4 neat hands on the coffee table. All of us had been downtown together. The staff hadn't come in. We'd left the Do Not Disturb sign on the door. We even asked the front desk if anyone entered our room for any reason. They swore no one had. Honestly, it felt way too personal for a gimmick. And legally, it'd be a nightmare for the hotel if they were messing with guests like that. We all sat in silence for a bit, trying to explain it away. I said, half jokingly, that if a ghost was in the room, they should give us another sign, something more obvious. But I still had that little doubt in my head. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Just maybe. My brother's girlfriend decided to test it. She stacked the cards neatly back into the box, putting one joker on top and the other on the bottom, then left the deck right in the middle of the table. My husband, ever the skeptic, set his own trap. He propped an empty bottle of whiskey against the front door, angled so that any movement would knock it over. He also took photos of the setup for proof. That night, we went out for dinner and drinks. When we returned around 11, my husband slowly unlocked the door and reached in to take a few pictures before we stepped inside. What we saw made all of us freeze. Right in front of the door, there was a neat row of cards, face down, except for the 2 jokers. They were face up, side by side. The rest of the deck was still sitting in the card box on the table, untouched, and the whiskey bottle still standing exactly how we left it. We stayed up for hours after that, hoping something else would happen. But the room stayed quiet. Still, none of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next morning, my husband was even more convinced there had to be a logical explanation. Nothing had happened while we were in the room, so maybe, just maybe, it was all in our heads. I was the last one to use the bathroom before he went in to take a shower. Everything looked normal when I left. While he was showering, the rest of us went downstairs for breakfast. Maybe 30 minutes later, he came down looking pale and tense. He accused us of sneaking back up and writing on the mirror, but we hadn't. The word save had appeared in thick, cloudy letters on the bathroom mirror. He said it slowly became visible while he was in the shower, like it was written from the inside out. To this day, none of us have an explanation. The cards, the mirror, the timing. It all feels too deliberate to ignore, and too subtle to fully understand. Have you ever stayed somewhere that made you question what's real? Because I'm not sure I'll ever stop wondering. It was one of those warm July nights in Silver Springs, the kind where the air sticks to your skin and the cicadas won't shut up. We had a few close friends over, something we did almost every weekend. Good food, cold beer, loud laughter. Just a bunch of regular people trying to hold on to something simple. After we'd finished dinner, we cleared off the patio table and dove into a few rounds of Pente. If you haven't played it, it's this addicting little strategy game with glassed stones and sneaky moves. Hours passed like nothing. Eventually, I decided to sit out for a bit. I needed a breather, so I slipped outside, cigarette in hand, and stepped off the patio to where the yard opened up beneath the stars. The night sky was unreal, clear as glass, scattered with stars, the kind of sky that makes you stop and actually look. I pulled a cushion from one of the patio chairs and wandered over to my truck, dropped the tailgate, climbed into the bed, and laid back to take it all in. From where I was, I could still hear the laughter drifting from the house, the clink of bottles and easy chatter. But out there, just past the soft glow of porch light, it was me and the sounds of a southern summer, crickets, the low rustle of trees, a frog or two. It was one of those rare moments where everything feels right and you remember to breathe a little slower. I must have been lying there for 20 minutes, just soaking in the stillness, when I heard it. A voice, right beside me. It was Jennifer's voice. I froze. My body snapped to attention so fast. I almost rolled off the truck bed. My pulse jumped straight into my ears, drowning out everything else. Without thinking, I flung myself over the side of the truck, didn't even bother with the tailgate, and hit the ground hard. Spinning around, I scanned the yard, but it was empty. No one was there. Every instinct screamed at me to move, and I bolted, up the deck stairs, through the screen door, and back inside like something was chasing me. I tried to play it cool, but one look at my face and the room went quiet. "You look like you've seen a ghost," someone joked. The irony didn't go unnoticed. So I told them, at least part of it. I left out the panic, just said I'd heard Jennifer's voice out there when no one was around. That was enough to get a few eyebrows raised. Still feeling a little off, I asked our neighbor, Kyle, to come back outside with me. I wasn't about to be alone out there again. We stood on the deck, talking it over, trying to make sense of it. The others eventually wandered out too, beers in hand, bringing the noise and comfort of normal life with them. I took a seat, making a point not to grab the cushion I'd taken earlier. It was still back in the truck, and I wasn't about to go fetch it. Our dog, Sophie, hopped into my lap. She's a little mutt but sweet, and always knows when I need her close. I was chatting with Jennifer and Kyle when Sophie suddenly stiffened. She growled low, then started barking, loud and sharp, right at the wooden wall behind me. Her eyes were locked on a single spot. It wasn't like her. She never barked at shadows. Everyone went silent. We all stared at the wall, then at Sophie, then back at me. And that's when I felt it. A burst of icy air, right behind my left shoulder. Not a breeze, not a draft. Just this sudden, unnatural cold that clung to the back of my neck, crawled over my ear, and made my skin prickle. On a summer night in the South, cold like that doesn't happen. I must have gone pale because the conversation stopped again, and everyone was just watching me. I tried to soothe Sophie, but she wasn't having it. She barked and growled until Jennifer scooped her up and carried her inside. The rest of us stayed there staring at the wall. I stepped away, but the cold didn't follow me. It just hung in the air, right where I'd been sitting. Someone reached out slowly, like they weren't sure if they wanted to touch it, and when their hand entered the space, they pulled back instantly. "It's freezing," they whispered. Gradually, the cold faded, but the tension didn't. I've had weird things happen before. This house has its quirks, flickering lights, whispers in empty rooms, that sort of thing. But this was different. It wasn't just a chill or a bark. It was the voice. It was Jennifer's voice, down to the exact tone, the softness, the way she says my name. It mimicked her. That's what still gets me. Whatever it was, it knew exactly how to sound. And I can't help but wonder, was it trying to get my attention? Did it want something? I panicked. I ran. But maybe, just maybe, if I'd stayed calm and listened, I'd have learned something. Some nights, I think about that. I think about lying there in the back of my truck, under the stars, and how close that voice was. And I wonder, what would have happened if I'd answered it? What do you think? Have you ever heard a voice that wasn't supposed to be there? Here's what happened to me one cold October evening in 1986. I was 26 at the time, living at a residential rehab center just outside Silver Springs, a quiet little town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I'd lost most of my eyesight due to complications from diabetes, and the center was helping me regain independence. The place was a sprawling facility, almost an entire city block's worth of buildings, all connected by long, echoing hallways and shaded courtyards. Most of us staying there were dealing with serious medical issues, and over the years, a few people had quietly passed away in their rooms. Naturally, there were stories, rumors whispered over late-night coffee or in the corners of the lounge. One popular story involved the elevator in the main administration building. The business office manager, a no-nonsense guy named Mr. Bailey, said it would sometimes move between floors on its own, usually late in the afternoon when no one else was around. He'd hear the soft chime echo through the empty hallway, hurry out to see who was coming down, only to find the elevator completely empty. I figured it was just a mechanical glitch, maybe the old wiring playing tricks, but others, they weren't so sure. Another tale made the rounds after an incident in the training hall. Mr. Bailey was chatting with two security guards near the reception desk on the first floor when they all heard something that stopped them cold, the unmistakable sound of heavy furniture dragging across the floor directly above them. Loud, deliberate, they raced upstairs, expecting to find someone moving things or at least something out of place. But the second floor was perfectly still, chairs untouched, desks aligned, nothing. Even the guards, who knew every creak of that old building, looked uneasy. But my story happened in the dorm building in a small hallway where I had my room. It was a narrow wing off the main building with only 4 rooms and a fire exit stairwell at one end. That stairwell led either up to the women's dorms on the second floor or out into a small enclosed courtyard. On the other end of the hall, 2 wooden swinging doors opened into the women's lounge, where people would hang out, chat, or take a break before heading to the counseling center, which was just beyond. It was a Friday night, and I had just finished a quiet dinner in the cafeteria. Using my white cane, I made my usual path back, through the reception area, up a short stairwell, down the long hallway of the counseling wing, and into the women's lounge. I crossed the soft carpet, nudged open the swinging doors, and entered the dim hallway to my room. Mine was the first on the left. The room across from it was empty that weekend, or so I thought. The hall was tight. If someone stood outside one door, you could reach out and touch the one across from it. I stepped up to my door, fished out my key, and reached with my left hand to find the lock. Just as I started to slide the key in with my right hand, tap, 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 tap. 5 soft, deliberate knocks, coming from the door right across the hallway. I turned, thinking maybe someone had walked up behind me and I hadn't heard them. "Hello," I said. Silence. I waited, scanning the dim hallway with what little peripheral vision I had left. No footsteps, no voices, just stillness. Trying to shake it off, I turned back to my door. But then it hit me, what if the tapping had come from inside the room across the hall? Maybe someone needed help. It wasn't unusual for diabetic clients to be placed on the ground floor for emergencies. I stepped across and raised my hand to knock. And just before I touched the door, tap, 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 tap. Again, the same rhythm. Only this time, I was sure it came from my side of the door, the hallway, just inches from my face. My stomach dropped. I was alone, completely alone. Then a voice inside the room, female, calm but surprised, said, "Yeah, someone's at the door. Can you check?" The door opened, and I was standing there, hand frozen in the air like a statue. The woman who answered looked just as startled as I probably did. She asked if I needed something. I hesitated, then managed to say, I thought someone was knocking. They exchanged a look. One of them nodded. Yeah, we heard it too. Trying to cut the tension, I offered a nervous laugh. Maybe your guide dog leaned on the door. The first woman blinked. We don't have a guide dog. She paused, then walked over to the door and tapped it. 5 times, exactly the way we'd all heard. It wasn't a trick of acoustics. The taps were at my shoulder height, right where a person's knuckles would hit. If someone had been standing there, they'd have been close enough to whisper in my ear. All 3 of us searched for answers. We opened every door in the hall. We swung the stairwell door, opened the courtyard exit, even tapped the walls. Nothing made the same sound. Nothing even came close. Eventually, we gave up, each of us retreating to our rooms with more questions than answers. That night, I didn't turn off a single light in my room. The following Monday, I brought it up with Mrs. Patterson, the director of vocational training. I asked, carefully, if anyone had ever passed away on that hallway. She didn't even blink. Yes, she said. Years ago, an older woman had just finished a long day of orientation and mobility training. She went to her room to rest. She never woke up. I told her what we'd experienced. She listened closely, then smiled in that tight, professional way people do when they're hiding more than they're saying. Please, she said gently, don't tell the other clients. Some of them scare easily. I promised I wouldn't, but every time I walked past that hallway afterward, I couldn't help but wonder if she was still there, quiet, polite, and knocking. Have you ever heard something when you knew you were alone? Before we dive in, just know this isn't the kind of story we share to scare people. It's more about the quiet, lingering strangeness that settles into everyday life when you least expect it. My wife, Emily, and I are lucky to have our little guy, Max, a 6-year-old Shih Tzu with a heart way too big for his small frame. He's gentle, intuitive, and seems almost too in tune with us. If one of us is feeling down, sick, or anxious, Max picks up on it immediately. He'll curl up next to you, eyes full of concern, like he's silently saying, I've got you. But ever since we moved into our current home in Pine Lake, things haven't felt entirely right, especially for Max. Over the last 4 years, we've noticed strange behavior. He'll suddenly tuck his tail and dash from one room to another, like something invisible just touched him or scared him. Naturally, we'd inspect him, checking for insect bites or anything that might have hurt him. But we never found a thing. No scratches, no bugs, nothing. Then there's the growling. Max is the kind of dog who loves everyone. Neighbors, delivery guys, even the vacuum. But now and then, when we're just relaxing in the living room, watching a movie or reading, he'll suddenly raise his head and start growling at the far corner of the room. Always the same spot. It's low, cautious, not aggressive. More like warning us. It always makes us stop and listen, hearts beating a little faster. Our house has those Fox hardwood laminate floors. Great for cleaning, terrible for traction. When Max tries to take off running, he skitters around like a cartoon dog. You can actually hear his nails scrambling before he gains footing. That sound's become something of a warning for us. If we hear it unexpectedly, it means something has startled him, and we should probably pay attention. About 2 or 3 weeks after we first moved in, Emily and I were jolted awake around 2 a.m. by the sound of claws skittering across the living room floor. Only, Max was curled up right there at our feet in bed. The sound was clear and distinct, like multiple dogs running. We froze, just listening. I eventually got up, heart pounding, and crept toward the living room. The moment I stepped in, it stopped, like someone hit mute. It kept happening, off and on, for weeks, always in the middle of the night. I'd get up, check, and find nothing. No broken windows, no animals, nothing. Over time, the incidents became less frequent, maybe once or twice a month, but they never stopped entirely. Just last Friday morning around 4 a.m., it happened again. This time it woke Emily, not me. And that's not the only thing. There's something else I haven't really said aloud until now. I think Max has a double, like a phantom version of him. I've seen it, twice. Once I caught what I thought was Max stepping out of the bathroom and strolling across the hallway into our bedroom. It was strange because I hadn't seen him go into the bathroom in the first place. But when I checked the bedroom, he wasn't there. He was actually lying on the couch in the living room, head resting on a throw pillow, fast asleep. Another time, I saw the same exact scene, only this time Emily saw it too. We both saw Max go into the bedroom, but the real Max was outside in the backyard. Which brings me to what happened 2 weeks ago. It was a normal weekday morning. I was in the kitchen making sandwiches for work while Emily sat at the table sipping coffee, watching the local news. Max had been let out in the backyard to do his usual business, and like clockwork, we heard his bark at the back door. I went to let him in, but when I opened the door, he wasn't there. Thinking maybe he wandered off to the side, I stepped out onto the deck, looked around, nothing. I turned back inside, confused, and asked Emily if she heard the bark too. She said yes, and got up to check the front door. That's when we saw him. Max was about 60 yards away, slowly trotting up the driveway from the far end of the yard. There's just no way he could have been that far off and also barking right at the door 30 seconds earlier. We didn't say much, just exchanged a look. It was one of those moments where no explanation feels right, but the silence says enough. What do you think we heard? Was it Max, or something pretending to be him? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was the summer of 2012 in the quiet town of Pine Hollow, nestled deep in central Missouri. A couple of my friends and I were doing what teenagers often do when summer boredom sets in, driving around aimlessly, hoping the day would lead us somewhere interesting. None of us were particularly good at sitting still, so we piled into my old Chevy and hit the road, hoping we'd stumble across a party or at least something out of the ordinary. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when we headed out. For the next hour or so, we cruised through town, passing the same gas stations and quiet neighborhoods with nothing to show for it. Feeling restless, we figured we'd check out one of the nearby towns. The closest was Maple Ridge, a small farming community mostly known for deer season and its old general store. Still, it felt like a better option than going home. Once we got there, I steered the truck toward the outskirts, figuring anything worth finding wouldn't be in the middle of town. But after another stretch of nothing, we were ready to call it quits. That's when my buddy Darren suddenly leaned forward from the back seat and told me to stop. Said he'd spotted something off the side of the road that looked interesting. With nothing better to do, I slowed down and pulled a U-turn, creeping back toward the spot he pointed out. We pulled onto the shoulder and climbed out to get a better look. There, hidden behind some brush, was a narrow footpath, barely noticeable, maybe 2 feet wide at most. It looked like an old trail that hadn't been used in years. We stood there for a moment, exchanging glances. There was some debate over whether it might be private property, but curiosity got the better of us. We shrugged and headed in. By the time we reached the end of the trail, the sun was dipping low. In the middle of a small clearing stood a rundown wooden cabin, weathered and leaning slightly, like it was barely holding itself together. The sight of it sent a cold twinge through me, but Darren and Zach were already excited to check it out. I hesitated and asked, "What if someone still lives here?" But Zach pointed to the busted door lying on the ground, half covered in leaves. "That place is abandoned," he said. "No way anyone's still living here." The inside of the cabin smelled like mold and rot, like something had been left to die in there. It was bigger than it looked from outside, with 4 rooms. A front room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. But what really struck me was that it wasn't empty. Old furniture was still in place, and random belongings were scattered around. Dust-covered clothes, broken dishes, even an old family photo half buried under a pile of mail. Everything was blanketed in grime, like no one had stepped foot inside for decades. We decided to split up to look around. Darren took the front room, Zach checked the kitchen, and I went for the bedroom in the back. The bedroom was simple, with a single bed, a broken dresser, and an old oil lamp on the floor. I started looking through the drawers, touching things carefully, half expecting something to crumble in my hands. Then something changed. The air grew thick, like breathing through a wet cloth. I thought maybe I was coming down with something, or maybe it was just the smell. But then I felt it. There was someone behind me. Not just a feeling either. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. My chest tightened as I turned around fast, but no one was there. Still, the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. It felt like something heavy was pressing down on me from all sides. Just then, Darren and Zach burst into the room. They both looked pale. "You feel that?" Darren asked. "Like something's sitting on your shoulders?" I nodded. I was about to tell them what had just happened when it hit again, only harder. The pressure slammed into me like a wave. And then, no joke, I was lifted off the ground. The next thing I knew, I was flying through the air. I crashed through the window behind me and landed outside, the glass cutting into my arms and the fall knocking the wind right out of me. I barely heard my friends shouting before everything went black. I don't blame Darren or Zach. They weren't even close to me when it happened. There's no way either of them could have thrown me like that. It wasn't them. Whatever was in that cabin, it didn't want me there. Maybe we pissed it off by snooping around. Or maybe it was the bedroom specifically. Either way, it made its point. A few weeks later, against every ounce of common sense I had, I went back. I had to see it again, try to understand what happened. But when I reached the end of the trail, the clearing was empty. No cabin, no door, no broken glass, not even a patch of disturbed earth. It was like the place had never existed. But it did. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Darren and Zach still remember it, clear as day. That was the first, and hopefully last, time I ever encountered something I couldn't explain. And even now, years later, part of me still wonders, what would have happened if I had stayed just a little longer? Before we even finished unpacking the last box, I already knew the place wasn't quite right. My wife, Emily, and I had just gotten married, and money was tight. I was still finishing up my degree, and she was the one keeping us afloat with her job at a local daycare. The only home we could afford was an older mobile home parked on a quiet stretch of road just outside Silver Springs, Kentucky. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, and for a while, it worked. We settled in. Life was simple, predictable. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, small things began to happen, things that didn't add up. I've always been a neat freak, borderline obsessive. I know where everything is, down to the last paperclip. So when my car keys vanished one morning from the dish by the front door, I tore the place apart. I checked under the couch, behind the fridge, places they had no business being. I finally gave up. 2 days later, they were back. In the dish, exactly where I swore I had left them. At first, we laughed it off. Emily teased me, said I was getting forgetful. But it kept happening. Things went missing. My watch, the TV remote, even the scissors. Then, just like before, they'd reappear in the most obvious spots. It drove me insane. I'd search a spot 5 times only for the missing item to show up right there hours later. Then came the night I saw her. It was around 3 a.m. I remember because I just checked the clock on my nightstand. I wasn't dreaming, I know that for sure. I was fully awake when I sat up in bed. At the foot of the mattress, in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the blinds, stood an old woman, frail, still, just staring at me. Her eyes didn't blink. Her mouth didn't move. She didn't feel like a threat, more like she was waiting for something. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would wake Emily. In a panic, I lunged forward and tried to swing at her, just sheer instinct. But before I could even move an inch, she vanished. Just gone. No sound. No trace. I sat there in the dark, shaking. I got out of bed and checked every door, every window. All locked. Nothing was out of place. I didn't tell Emily. Not that night. I knew it would terrify her, and there was no way either of us would sleep if I brought it up. After that, the house changed. Or maybe I did. We started hearing things. Faint music, like a distant radio playing old-timey tunes. Once it sounded like someone whispering just beyond the walls. Every time, we checked the living room, the kitchen, even outside. But there was never anything there. No devices left on. No neighbors playing music. Just silence and that lingering, invisible presence. We were pretty isolated. Our place was tucked back at the end of a dirt road surrounded by woods. The only neighbor nearby was a sweet older woman who lived alone and went to bed by 7 p.m. every night. It wasn't her. I worked night shifts back then, 2 nights on, 2 nights off, at a local grocery distribution center. Emily had a habit of leaving the groceries near the front door for me to carry in when I got home. But more than once, I'd come inside and find the bags already unpacked, sodas stacked neatly in the pantry. She'd insist she hadn't done it. I hadn't either. We started joking that maybe the house had a helpful ghost. But then something happened that killed the humor real quick. One evening, I was getting ready for work and had placed a pack of razor blade refills on the edge of our bathtub while the water ran. I stepped out to grab a bottle of water from the kitchen. When I came back, the razors were no longer on the tub. They were sitting neatly in front of the toilet, which was nearly 8 feet away. I stood there in silence, trying to understand what I was seeing. I knocked the pack off the tub myself several times to see how far they could land. A foot, maybe 2, never 8. That's when I stopped pretending it was all just my imagination. Eventually, we saved up and built a small house closer to town. When we moved out, I finally told Emily about the old woman. She went pale, said she'd always felt like something was watching her there, but never wanted to admit it. We rented the mobile home out for a few years, then sold it to a young couple who tore it down and built a new home on the same lot. I never asked if anything strange happened to them. Maybe I didn't want to know. Now, years later, I still find myself thinking about that place. About her. I never saw her again, and nothing like that's happened since. Still, sometimes I wonder. Was she trying to tell me something? Or just making sure we never forgot she was there? Have you ever lived somewhere that didn't feel empty, even when it was? My story happened on September 24th, 2012, just after midnight. But before I get into what really happened, there's something important you need to know about me. My name is Emily. I was 25 at the time, living in a small, quiet town called Willow Creek, tucked away in northern Minnesota. I was a mom engaged to the man I loved, and doing my best to keep life steady. I'd had asthma since I was a kid, but I hadn't had any serious attacks in over a decade, until that winter, when things started to change. The day before everything unfolded was uneventful. I got up early, changed my daughter's diaper, gave her breakfast, and played her favorite cartoon, Super Y, so I could tidy up. My best friend stopped by around noon, just like she always did. We talked about everything from work to weird dreams and martial arts. Then, after she left, my fiancé and I put our daughter to bed and settled in on the couch for a movie night. He'd had a long shift at the lumberyard, so by 11:30 he was out cold. I stayed up a little longer, but that old, tight feeling crept into my chest. If you've ever had asthma, you know that sensation, like something squeezing you from the inside. My inhaler had been empty for days, so I leaned on what I had: black coffee, hot tea with honey, and deep chest stretches. They helped for a bit. I managed to doze off around 1 a.m., but I kept waking up gasping. Every hour, it got worse. By the time my fiancé's alarm went off at 6:30, I could barely talk, let alone move. He had to be out early, but I told him I'd manage. He promised to come home early and grab the prescription on his way. I didn't tell him just how bad it had gotten. I didn't want to worry him. That whole morning was a blur of pain. Just standing up to get juice for my daughter felt impossible. I didn't even realize I was burning up with fever. I was too focused on breathing. Out of desperation, I grabbed my phone and started researching asthma triggers. Mold, dust, pet dander. I was surrounded. I wiped down everything I could reach with damp paper towels. Just boxing up some books took nearly 2 hours. By 11:45, I was done. My chest hurt so bad I could barely sit upright. I texted him a reminder about the inhaler, but I don't think he grasped how urgent it was. Time moved like molasses. By 2:15 p.m., I was crying, wheezing, and trying to distract myself with a movie. Anything to take my mind off the air I couldn't pull into my lungs. For those who haven't experienced it, imagine breathing through a coffee stirrer while someone slowly tightens a belt around your ribs. That's what it felt like. I started messaging him. Texts, calls, emails, even Facebook. By 5 p.m., I finally reached him. He'd been at the college library printing out financial aid paperwork for my school re-enrollment. He had no idea how serious things had become. When he got home, he called a friend to drive him to the pharmacy. While they were gone, I stayed on the couch, trying to stay upright, trying not to panic. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me from the fever, but it didn't go away. In the corner of our bedroom doorway, just barely visible from where I sat, stood a figure. Tall, human-shaped, but solid black, like it had been carved out of night itself. Its wings weren't soft or feathery. They looked like they were made of steel or some dark, metallic material. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there watching me. It wasn't evil. It didn't feel warm or cold. Just there, like a witness, a quiet observer. And something in me whispered a word I didn't want to hear. Angel. But not the kind from storybooks. No glowing light or trumpet sounds. Just this stillness. Like it had come to collect. Like it was waiting to see if I'd be leaving. I stared at it, tears streaming down my cheeks, and begged silently. Not now. Please, not yet. Let him come back. Let me stay. Just a little longer. The figure tilted slightly, almost like it heard me. Then it drifted, not walking but shifting, like a shadow slipping behind a doorway. When my fiancé burst through the door around 5:45 p.m., he handed me the inhaler and sprinted to the bathroom, right past where the figure had been. I took 2 deep puffs. Relief hit instantly, like someone unclogged the air. I could breathe. I could cry. I could think again. I didn't tell him about the figure, not right away. I needed time to process what I'd seen. I've always believed in something beyond this life, but that night made it feel real. I wasn't ready to die. I wasn't ready to leave my daughter behind. Whatever that thing was, angel, spirit, shadow, I'll never forget it. It didn't come to scare me. It came to remind me of how thin the line is, of how lucky I was. And sometimes, when the room gets quiet and the lights flicker for no reason, I wonder, was it watching me then too? This story takes place in Pine Hollow, a small, picturesque town tucked away in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Known for its colonial charm, crisp autumns, and historic buildings, Pine Hollow has quietly earned a reputation as one of the most haunted towns in the region. Locals blame it on the quartz veins that run deep beneath the soil. Some say it channels spiritual energy. Others call it cursed. Whether you believe in all that or not, one thing's certain. There's something about Pine Hollow that lingers in the air. At the edge of town sits the old Ridgeview Hotel, a grand Victorian structure built in the 1880s, perched high on a wooded ridge. Locals call it the crown of Pine Hollow, though outsiders know it better for its long history of ghost sightings and unexplained events. It's been featured on every major paranormal TV show you can think of: Ghost Watchers, Spirit Seekers, even that special episode on Haunted America. My husband and I have visited Ridgeview 5 times now. We live just under an hour away, But I swear, that place calls to me. Every visit feels like it reveals a new layer, like the building is slowly letting me in. That might sound strange, but once you've stayed there, you'll understand. Even hardened skeptics admit something isn't quite right. Before I get into what we experienced firsthand, I think it's worth giving you some background. The Ridgeview was built in 1887, during the height of the healing retreat craze. People believed the mountain air and nearby mineral springs had restorative powers. Wealthy visitors from D.C. and New York would travel down by rail, seeking cures for ailments like consumption, arthritis, and even hysteria. The hotel was a luxury spa resort back then, complete with horse stables, ballroom dances, tea parlors, and a full orchestra for nightly entertainment. But the wellness fad didn't last. By the early 1900s, people began to realize the so-called healing waters weren't as miraculous as promised. Business declined, and the hotel struggled to stay afloat. Over the years, it was converted into a finishing school, then a boarding house, and eventually a sanatorium. Then came Dr. Calvin Maris in 1938. He wasn't a real doctor, of course, just a con man with slick hair and a silver tongue. He purchased the hotel and rebranded it as the Maris Institute for Alternative Medicine, promising painless cures for everything from cancer to mental illness. Desperate patients came from all over, clutching onto hope. What they didn't know was that Maris had no medical training and was administering bogus tonics made of alcohol, lavender, and crushed aspirin. He made millions off those fake elixirs, but people started noticing something darker. Patients who checked in rarely checked out. Letters would be sent to families saying their loved ones had been cured and gone on their way, but no one ever heard from them again. While Maris was never formally charged with murder, it's rumored that dozens of bodies were buried on the grounds or hidden in the basement. Eventually, the feds caught up with him. He was arrested for mail fraud in 1941 and sent to prison, but the damage was done. The hotel sat empty for decades until it was restored in the early 2000s and reopened as a historic inn. It's beautiful again, but the past hasn't really left. Now on to the paranormal side. The Ridgeview has more ghost stories than I can count. The most famous spirit is Daniel, a young stonemason who died during construction in 1886. He reportedly fell from the rooftop and landed near what is now room 314. Guests in that room often report hearing heavy footsteps pacing above them, even though there's nothing but roof overhead. Some say they've seen hands appear in the fogged-up bathroom mirror. Others say they've been nudged awake in the dead of night with no one else in the room. Another frequent sighting is of a nurse dressed in white, often seen wheeling a gurney down the third-floor hallway around midnight, the same time the hospital staff would quietly remove deceased patients. Guests have reported the squeaking sound of wheels in the hallway, only to find it empty when they open their doors. The basement, once used as the morgue, is the most disturbing part of the building. It still holds the original autopsy table and an old industrial freezer that's no longer in use, but still emits a low hum. Guests say the temperature drops suddenly there, and some claim to feel pressure on their chest, as if something is trying to keep them from leaving. The laundry room on the third floor is another hot spot. Machines have been known to turn on in the middle of the night, despite being unplugged. During our very first visit, I felt an icy draft hit me as soon as we stepped into the lobby. My husband and mother were with me and felt nothing. As we checked in, we overheard another guest complaining to the front desk about strange text messages she'd been receiving. The messages only said one thing, 10 to 2142. When she asked the staff what it meant, they said the hotel had been closed on that exact date due to a fire in the basement that nearly destroyed the building. She looked shaken and left the lobby quickly. We wandered through the upper levels, taking the staircase up to the fourth floor. About halfway up, my husband stopped cold. He said he felt like the room was spinning, like he was about to faint. We later found out that a child with vertigo had died in a fall on those very stairs decades ago. A lot of guests report dizziness in that exact spot. On a later visit, I kept hearing the name Daniel whispered in my left ear as we walked through the hallway near room 314. I figured I was just imagining things, until my husband went into the bathroom and came running out seconds later. Every single faucet had turned on at once. I'd been standing outside the door. No one else was near us. The Ridgeview Hotel is equal parts stunning and unsettling. It's the kind of place that charms you by day and haunts you by night. Whether it's shadowy figures, flickering lights, or sudden cold spots, something always seems to be watching. I haven't gone back since that last visit, but honestly, I'd return in a heartbeat. There's something about that hotel that feels unfinished, like it still has more to reveal. Have you ever stayed in a place that didn't feel quite right? What do you think really happened inside those walls? I actually live in Oregon now, but this story took place in a small town down in Mississippi during a strange, transitional part of my life. I ended up there because I couldn't, wouldn't, absolutely refused to watch my boyfriend walk away again. We'd been in a long-distance relationship for years, one that started from the unlikeliest place, a raid group in World of Warcraft. He lived way out in North Carolina, and I was tucked away on the West Coast. For a long time, we made the distance work with video calls and weekend visits, but when he came out to see me in person for the second time, something in me snapped. When it came time for him to leave again, I couldn't do it. I couldn't just wave goodbye like before. I took a term off from college, booked a flight back with him, and gave myself 3 months to make it work. 3 months to earn enough to bring us both back to Oregon together. Being so far from home, it was tougher than I expected. I was already nervous about leaving, and juggling school stuff online while trying to find a job felt like a mental tightrope. I reached a point where I thought I was going to break, just from the pressure. That's when I gave in and applied for a job I'd sworn I wouldn't touch. A graveyard shift position at a 24-hour superstore just off a quiet highway. Back in Oregon, folks have all kinds of opinions about big box stores. But this wasn't about pride. It was survival. The pay was decent, since they were remodeling the entire layout, and I was brought in to clean up messes left behind by regular staff and get the shelves in order. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and I didn't expect anything strange to happen. Until that one morning. I was working alone, straightening shelves in the seasonal section, peeling off faded labels and replacing them with fresh tags. The store was mostly empty, which made it easier to focus, but every now and then, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Each time I turned, there was nothing. At first, I thought it was just me being tired, or maybe the flicker of an overhead light, but the movement didn't stop. It started happening more often, and always from the same angle, just outside my direct view. Eventually, I began to notice something more specific. The figure I kept catching glimpses of looked like a woman. She had long, curly brown hair, and she wore this bright orange shirt. I could never make out her face or even see her clearly. She was always turned away. Her lower half was blurry, like it didn't quite belong to this world. The more it happened, the more I started watching for her. I wandered a few aisles, pretending to straighten things while keeping an eye out for a flash of orange. But the store was still and quiet. I was completely alone. That's when my supervisor startled me, walking up behind me to say it was time for lunch. I stepped outside and sat on the edge of the loading dock, eating cold rotisserie chicken from a plastic container. The sun was out, but the air had that dense southern humidity, thick and unmoving. I kept thinking about the woman. No one on the crew wore orange, and I hadn't seen any customers dressed like that either. Part of me wondered if it was the cleaning chemicals, or maybe just the stress. I tried to laugh it off, tried to let it go, but when I went back in and got assigned to clean the women's apparel section, specifically the hosiery and undergarments aisle, it all came back. I was alone again, organizing nylon leggings, when I saw her. Again, off to my left. Same curly brown hair, same bright orange shirt. This time, she was closer. There was something else too, just for a split second. I thought I saw a second figure. A man in a plain white shirt, standing a few feet behind her. But when I turned to look, there was nothing, just shelves. Frustrated, I crouched down and started scrubbing the metal framing under one of the lower racks. And that's when I saw it, something tucked deep underneath the bottom shelf. It looked like trash at first, maybe some old packaging. But when I pulled it out, I realized it was tissue paper, soft and thin, but strangely intact. That struck me as odd. There wasn't anything like that in this section. I stood up slowly and unfolded it. Written on it, in delicate, almost old-fashioned cursive, was a single line repeated over and over again. A day lived without laughter is a day lost. I just stared at it. Something about the neatness of the writing, the repetition, the strange place it had been hidden. It chilled me more than I expected. After that, I never saw her again. Or the man. I didn't go looking either. Something about that note made me feel like the message had been delivered. Whatever they were, whoever they were done. And somehow, that felt okay. The rest of my time there passed quietly. The stress didn't vanish, but it eased. Little by little, I started sleeping better, smiling more. Now I'm back in Oregon, still with my boyfriend. Life's not perfect, but it feels solid. I don't know who or what I saw in that store, but sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that woman was someone I once knew, or maybe even a version of me, someone trying to reach across time and remind me what really matters. I'll never really know, but I'm grateful, and I'll never forget that bright orange shirt. I was born in 1981, not in some sprawling metropolis or a tiny backwoods town, but in a dusty little place called Pine Hollow, tucked into the Nevada desert. Not much ever happened there, just long stretches of highway, faded motels, and the kind of silence that settles into your bones. My parents loved me deeply. I was my dad's second kid, my mom's first. My older half-brother lived with his mother out in Oregon, so it was just the three of us for a while. 2 years later, my younger brother came along, and for a time, it felt like everything was just the way it should be. My folks always said I was conceived in the back of an old Chevy Suburban. They laughed about it like it was some badge of honor. My brother and I used to tease them, calling them desert hippies, and they owned it proudly. My mom carried me through most of her pregnancy while living out of that beat-up truck, parked behind a gas station where my dad worked part-time fixing tires and patching radiators. It wasn't until a few weeks before I was born that he managed to scrounge together enough cash to rent a small apartment, barely livable, but it had a working heater and was close to his job. I must have been pretty content in the womb because I stayed in there a full 2 weeks past my due date. When I finally decided to make an appearance, it nearly killed us both. My mom tried to have me naturally, but I'd grown too large, and things went bad, fast. The doctor performed an emergency C-section. My dad used to say I entered the world screaming like I'd just been evicted from heaven. Of course, I don't remember any of it, but according to my parents, I came out bald, pudgy, and howling. The stress of the birth left my head oddly shaped for months, like a squished cone. It took almost a year of careful hands and gentle sleep positioning for my skull to even out. 2 weeks after I was born, they brought me home. My dad drove so slow, he refused to pass a guy on a bike for 6 straight miles. When they finally made it back to that cramped apartment, they realized they'd forgotten something kind of important, a place for me to sleep. So for the first 2.5 months, I slept between them on their old waterbed. That mattress groaned with every movement, and the heater underneath always smelled like burnt plastic. It was during those early months that something strange happened, something my parents would eventually call the first incident. One night, they just tucked me into the usual spot between them. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the parking lot light leaking through the blinds. But I wouldn't stop crying. My mom rocked me, sang lullabies, did everything she could. Nothing worked. Finally, my dad suggested what always seemed to calm me, a drive. They wrapped me up, got into the Suburban, and drove aimlessly down the highway until I passed out. Relieved, they came home, crawled into bed, and drifted off. At around 3 a.m., they were jolted awake by my screams. My mom flicked on the light, and for a moment, panic set in. I wasn't where they'd left me. My dad spotted me on the far side of the bed, almost hanging off the edge. My leg was wedged deep between the mattress and the wooden frame. When he reached out to grab me, he told me later, he almost didn't recognize me. My face looked off, distant, like I wasn't really there. And just as they freed my leg, the bedroom door slammed shut, hard. No wind, no windows open, just that loud final slam. My mom screamed, covering her mouth. My dad tried to brush it off as coincidence, but neither of them could explain how I had gotten there, or why I hadn't made a sound until that exact moment. They rushed me to the ER. After x-rays, the doctors told them my leg was broken, from the hip down to my knee. It made no sense. I couldn't even crawl at that age. The staff asked questions. A social worker showed up. Police came, but there were no charges, just raised eyebrows and quiet conversations in the hallway. The whole thing stayed a mystery. After that night, my parents didn't last long in that apartment. My mom swore the air had changed, that it felt thick, like it was watching. Within a week, we packed up and left Nevada behind, moving east into Colorado. For a while, they lived out of a rundown camper parked behind an old mechanic's garage. I was sent to live with my grandparents in a town called Millstone Ridge, population 800, tucked away in the mountains. I stayed in the hospital for nearly a month while my leg healed. Then came a year and a half of bouncing between my parents and grandparents. By the time I learned to walk, something in me had changed. I avoided people. I'd wander off and hide in plain sight, under tables, behind doors, even inside closets with the lights off. I'd flip switches randomly, like I needed the light. Darkness made me nervous, and once I was found, I'd simply find another place to disappear into. It became a ritual. One winter night, I was hiding behind my grandparents' old cast iron stove. My grandma spotted me, scooped me up, and gently placed me on the couch with a blanket. As she turned away, I started mumbling in my sleep, caught in some nightmare. She hesitated, turned back to check on me. That's when it happened. A framed photograph, about the size of a TV tray, flew across the room and hit her hard in the arm. The glass shattered, slicing deep into her skin. She screamed. Everyone in the room turned. There were 7 people there that night. All of them saw it, and none of them could explain it. That scar's still on her forearm. Eventually, I returned to my parents full time. By then, they'd settled down in a small city near the Colorado-New Mexico border. They were still living in that same battered camper, but things had calmed a bit. They had news, big news. I was going to be a big brother. It was around that time when my behavior started to shift in a way that deeply unsettled people around me. I was barely 2, and unlike most kids, I never had an imaginary friend. Instead, I said things that froze adults in their tracks. It wasn't the way I talked. It was what I said. My words felt like they belonged in some kind of horror flick, only I'd never seen one. My parents said I would scream at the walls, sobbing uncontrollably, clawing at the air like I was trying to keep something away. No amount of rocking or soothing seemed to help. Eventually, out of desperation, they took me to see a child therapist in the nearby town of Maple Hollow, a quiet place tucked just outside Silver Springs, Virginia. The therapist's office smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. He asked the usual stuff for a toddler. "What shows do you watch on TV?" I answered literally, like I always did, black and white. My parents only had a small old box TV with an antenna, the kind that played reruns and fuzz between channels. I don't remember what I drew during that session, but the conversation, it stayed with me. When the therapist gently asked why I got so scared of my imaginary friend, I looked up and said, "He's not imaginary." Then I started crying. He leaned in, his voice low and kind. "Why does he scare you?" Still crying, I whispered, "He wants to kill it." The therapist frowned. "Kill what?" "The world," I said. That night I had the dream, and I've never really woken up from it, not all the way. In that dream, I saw what he wanted to do, how he'd destroy everything. The sky turned black, the ground split open, and all I could hear were 3 whispered words, sharp and cold. "I'll take you." Years later, when I was around 20, I finally asked my parents if they remembered that night. I needed to know if it was just in my head. What they told me still makes my blood run cold. They remembered those words too. I'll take you. But here's the thing. They said it wasn't my voice they heard. We didn't experience anything out of the ordinary for a while after that. Almost a year passed. By then, my baby brother was 6 months old, and I was just about to turn 3. We had moved again, this time across state lines to a small town in Tennessee, right along the edge of a dense patch of woods. My dad had bought a modest 2-bedroom house outside Pine Lake. It wasn't anything special, but it was ours. Bought it outright. He'd say with a proud grin, "No bank, no rent." Move-in day was exhausting. We spent hours hauling furniture, boxes, and kitchen stuff inside. By the time evening hit, we were too tired to cook. So we grabbed dinner at this roadside diner that served fried catfish and hush puppies, still the best I've ever had. We came back to the house just after sundown, stomachs full and spirits high. But as soon as we walked in, the air changed. The boxes we had carefully stacked in the corner were scattered across the floor. My dad shrugged it off, saying maybe we'd stacked them too high or someone bumped into them. We laughed it off, cleaned up, and ended the night watching old reruns on our tiny black and white TV. MASH, Asterisk, and Heat Hall, mostly static between lines. The beds weren't set up yet, so my mom made a big pallet of blankets in the master bedroom. She had me and my brother sleep in there with them, just for the night. It was cozy, safe, until we heard the knock. The master bedroom was at the front of the house. My mom got up and looked out the window. No car, no footsteps in the snow, just the empty porch and the whisper of wind through the trees. She waited a moment, then came back to bed. A few minutes later, we heard it, footsteps, in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, each step landing with purpose. My dad, who had military training, grabbed his pistol from the nightstand. He slipped out of bed and moved fast, flicking on the hallway lights and checking every room. Nothing. No open doors. No broken windows. No one inside. He came back to bed, still on edge, but trying not to scare my mom. Or us. And then it started again. This time it wasn't just footsteps. It was stomping. Heavy, angry, pacing up and down the hallway. My dad jumped up again, locking me and my brother in the room before searching the house top to bottom. He checked the crawl space, the attic, even walked the perimeter of the property in his boots and coat. But once again, nothing. He came back inside, chilled and frustrated, and crawled into bed. And that's when it got worse. The stomping turned into running, wild, chaotic, like someone was sprinting back and forth in that narrow hall. My mom clutched me and my brother close, holding us like we might disappear. My dad stood at the door, gun in hand, eyes locked on the handle. And then it stopped, right outside the door. The air changed. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Then the footsteps started again, faster, harder, until they stopped at the door a second time. That's where my memory gets hazy. I remember the fear, the cold, paralyzing dread. I remember my dad raising the pistol. What happened next? It's a blur. Either the door burst open on its own, or my dad pulled the trigger first. But I do remember the sound. 3 deafening shots that echoed through the house like thunder. And when the door swung open, there was no one there. Even with the front door wide open, the stomping didn't stop. It crashed through the hallway, an invisible force so heavy and furious it made the walls tremble. The floor felt like it was about to split apart beneath us, like something massive had just landed on the roof and was charging through the house. My parents didn't wait. There was no discussion, no second guessing. They grabbed us, still in our pajamas, and we ran out into the freezing night air. We didn't even stop to grab shoes. The next morning, my dad and Uncle Mark returned to the house to grab what they could. But that thing, whatever it was, it hadn't let go. Over the next 6 months, no matter where we moved, the stomping sounds followed us. Always just out of sight. Always after dark. No house was quiet. No place felt safe. Then one night, the footsteps stopped, just like that. For the first time in half a year, we slept through the night without jolting awake to that thundering sound. The silence was unnerving at first. We'd grown so used to being on edge that peace felt foreign. We had just moved again, this time to a modest rental near the edge of a sleepy Colorado town called Pine Hollow. It wasn't much, just a single-story place with faded paint and creaky floors. But with the noises gone, we dared to believe that maybe the worst was behind us. At least my parents did. I stopped hiding under beds and in closets, but something inside me didn't go back to normal. I stayed in my room, barely speaking. I'd only come out to eat or use the bathroom, avoiding eye contact like it might trigger something. My parents thought it was from all the moving. Maybe they were right, or maybe it was something else entirely. Trying to help me adjust, they enrolled me in a small kindergarten class at the local elementary school. It seemed to help at first. I started to talk more, and I even made a couple of friends. I told my mom about one in particular, someone I really looked up to. But then, everything changed. One night around 2 a.m., my mom jolted awake. She said later she wasn't sure what woke her up, just that something felt wrong. Then she smelled smoke, thick and sharp. She grabbed my dad, and together they ran to wake us. I still remember how cold it was outside that night. My mom wrapped my brother and me in old quilts and carried us out to the driveway. We stood there barefoot, shivering, the gravel cutting into our feet. Mosquitoes bit our legs while my dad stayed inside, yelling and tossing whatever he could carry out the front window. Clothes, papers, even a lamp. Then I saw it. A glow from the far end of the house. A fire. It caught fast. The dry wind didn't help. We watched helplessly as the flames climbed the walls. My mom rushed us to a neighbor's house while my dad and I tried to save what we could. He pulled a tarp from the back of our beat-up station wagon, and we began piling everything onto it. Then came the sound. From inside the burning house, we heard something that didn't make sense, laughing and screaming, layered on top of each other, echoing through the crackle of the flames. It was high-pitched and human, but wrong. Twisted. We didn't talk about it. The fire investigators never found a cause. No faulty wiring. No stove left on. Nothing. My parents hoped whatever had followed us all those months had finally died in the fire. It hadn't. Nothing happened for years. No strange sounds. No shadows. No cold spots. Life moved on, or at least it pretended to. When I was in 3rd grade, we relocated again, this time to a farmhouse in the rolling hills outside of Bozeman, Montana. It was old, built sometime in the 1930s, with wide floorboards and a cracked concrete patio in the back. A rusty shed sat in the yard, smelling faintly of mothballs and old oil. A sliding glass door led into the living room, and the whole place had a strange, dusty charm. Our neighbors were kind. A family with 2 sons. The younger one was already taller than most adults, though he was only 12. I remember him pulling up the dirt driveway one afternoon, driving his mom's car with a goofy grin and a bag of gummy bears in his lap. We didn't mind that the house only had 2 bedrooms. My brother and I shared, and we turned the living room into a battlefield of toys and board games. There was a sandstone fireplace that howled when the wind rushed through the flue. It was loud but oddly comforting. That year, I learned I needed glasses. There had been a small chemical spill in the science room. And after that, my vision got worse. But the real problem started around the same time I began seeing shadows. They weren't the kind you see under your bed or behind a door. These moved, just barely, slipping across the edge of my sight like smoke. They always came when my dad was in a bad mood. My grades had slipped. I tried to explain it was because I couldn't see the chalkboard clearly, but my dad didn't want excuses. One night, after another fight about school, I saw a shadow through the sliding glass door. It reached out, slow and deliberate, and placed something that looked like a hand on my dad's shoulder. He snapped. He screamed at us, at me, at my mom. The names he called us still echo in my head. He said I was a freak, that I'd ruined everything. The shadows never stopped coming after that. My dad got worse, meaner. He stopped apologizing and started ignoring us completely unless he was yelling. Then one night he passed out on the couch watching TV. My brother and I were in bed, and I was trying to block out the sound of the wind and the flue when I heard him. He started screaming. Not words, just this low, guttural roar. Animalistic. The kind of sound you don't forget, because you know deep down it wasn't made by someone entirely human. Then the TV went silent, and so did everything else. I remember hearing my mom's voice, trembling and desperate, trying to wake my dad. She kept calling his name, shaking him over and over. I peeked out from the crack in our bedroom door, just enough to see her face lit by the faint flicker of the TV, and the tall, dark shapes surrounding them. I froze. These weren't just shadows. They had bodies, distorted, twisted, not human. Elbows bent the wrong way, limbs too long or too thin. It was like they were pulled from some nightmare and dropped into our living room. My mom kept shaking my dad, her voice louder now, almost cracking. Then suddenly, he gasped awake. The moment his eyes opened, the figures dissolved. Just like that. Gone. Like smoke slipping through cracks in the walls. A few weeks later, my mom and one of my brother's friends saw the same things. They had been watching TV when the shadows appeared again. My brother's friend bolted. He didn't say a word, just got up, left the house, and walked more than a mile home. He stayed friends with my brother after that, but he never stepped inside our house again. Things changed after that night. We began to move more often, like people on the run from something they couldn't explain or escape. New houses, new towns, new names on the mailbox. But that thing, whatever it was, always seemed to follow us, hiding just out of sight. Most of the time, I was the only one who caught glimpses of it. A shadow darting across the hallway, a voice echoing in the vents. Little things most people would chalk up to old wiring or wind. But they weren't normal. Not really. Light bulbs would burn out too fast. Radios would pick up strange static, like voices whispering through the noise. The front door would creak open on its own during still nights. No breeze, no explanation. By the time I was 13, we moved again, this time to a town in upstate Pennsylvania. Big enough to have a Walmart. Small enough that everyone still knew your business. The house we found was old, real old. Thick plaster walls, chipped and uneven. The floors creaked like they remembered every footstep from the last 100 years. It felt less like a home and more like something that needed to be put out of its misery. This was my 5th school. It felt cold and distant, but maybe that was what we needed, some kind of reset. My mom got a job at a plastics plant on the edge of town. Everyone said it wouldn't be around much longer. My dad, still on disability, was quieter these days. Ever since the night of the shadows, he'd become more withdrawn, calmer, but distant. Like a part of him had never come back. I still saw the shadows now and then, just quick flickers at the edge of my vision. In a grocery store freezer reflection, in the glass door at school, sometimes even at a relative's house. They weren't as present as before, but they hadn't gone away either. Some moved fast, disappearing as soon as I noticed them. A few would charge at me, but they never actually touched me, just stopped short and vanished. I started to wonder if I was losing it. So I kept it to myself. I focused on school, did my homework, tried to pretend things were normal. At night, though, the voices would start again, faint whispers crawling through the walls. Too soft to understand, but too clear to ignore. I bought a cheap clock radio for 50 cents at a yard sale and left it on every night, tuned to a local station that played moody alternative rock. The static and music blurred together just enough to drown everything else out. Then, one weekend, everything felt okay. We went to the movies as a family, laughed, had burgers and milkshakes at a place called Benny's Diner, came home with a couple of VHS rentals and curled up in the living room to watch them. For the first time in months, I actually let myself relax. My brother went to bed early, wiped out from the day. I stayed up with my parents, watching another movie. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt, like maybe we were finally settling into something normal. Then it happened. A little after midnight, my brother walked out of his room. He looked pale and sleepy, like he was still half dreaming. My parents thought maybe he just wanted to finish the movie with us. But he didn't say a word. He walked past the couch, past the TV, straight to the front door. He grabbed the knob and twisted. It was locked, but the door shook violently, way more than it should have for a house like that. He let go, turned toward us, and said, in a flat, distant voice, "I'll take this one too." I stopped breathing. I had heard those exact words before. Years ago, in a dream I tried to forget. A dream tied to the night of the fire. My brother's eyes met mine. Cold. Blank. Then everything started shaking. The front door rattled on its hinges. The wall around it trembled like something massive was pressing against it. The floor beneath us started to vibrate. Only the front half of the house seemed affected. Like whatever it was, it hadn't made it all the way in. Yet. My brother started unlocking the deadbolt. My mom leaped up, grabbing him just in time. He fought against her, strong for a kid his age. My dad shouted, "Don't let go of him," and rushed over to help. That's when we heard it. Laughter, echoing through the walls, loud, high-pitched, and cruel. The same twisted laughter we'd heard the night of the fire. My skin went cold, my stomach twisted. Then, just as suddenly, the laughter stopped. My mom dragged my brother back to his room and locked the door behind her. When she came back, her face was pale but firm, like she'd seen too much to question anything anymore. I couldn't move. My dad came over, trying to talk to me, but I couldn't even respond. His face shifted when he saw the fear in my eyes. He kept saying my name over and over until the dam broke inside me. I told them everything. The dream, the shadows, the voices, the way I'd always known that those words meant something terrible. I let it all spill out, the fear, the memories, the guilt. They listened, quiet, shaken. Then my dad confessed something I hadn't expected. He told us what he had heard that night, back when the fire happened. The same voice, the same words. "I'll take this one too." He'd heard it, just like I had, but he'd never spoken about it. Not once. Not to my mom. Not to anyone. We sat there, feeling like we'd unearthed something we were never meant to remember. Something dark that had always been there, waiting, watching. My mom didn't argue. She didn't try to explain it away. She just nodded, tears in her eyes, and said, "We're leaving." 3 days later, we were gone. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I thought my piano would bring harmony and joy into my life, but I never expected it to bring something far darker. Over time, unsettling things started happening, all of them tied to that piano. And now I can't help but wonder, do I have a ghost in my house? It all started one night when I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. The house was still and silent, the kind of quiet that makes the smallest sound stand out. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a faint, low note from the piano. It reminded me of when my dog, Max, sometimes bumps the keys as he walks by. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard it again, stronger this time. My heart raced. Too scared to check, I rushed into my brother's room and told him what I'd heard. He shrugged it off, saying Max must have jumped on the piano. It sounded like a reasonable explanation, so I tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the next morning, I decided to look. When I approached the piano, I noticed the lid was shut, covering the keys. That struck me as odd. Why would it be closed? I asked my mom if she had closed it, but she said no, she hadn't touched it. That sent a chill through me. A year ago, something even stranger happened. I was sitting at the piano, playing a song while the lights were off. The only light came from the kitchen, which bathed the room in a soft glow. Suddenly, the lights in the piano room flickered on. At first, I thought maybe one of my parents had flipped the switch for me, but when I turned around, the room was empty. I walked into the kitchen, where I found my parents making dinner. I asked if either of them had turned on the lights. They both looked at me puzzled and said they hadn't. Then around Christmas, the piano acted up again. We had the tree set up near it, with its lights dim as usual. I was in the kitchen, watching my parents prepare dinner, when I noticed the lights in the piano room flickering on and off, almost like they were playing a game. Then, to my shock, the lights on the Christmas tree flickered to life. I stood there frozen, not sure what to think. Just a few days ago, the strangest thing happened. I was at the piano again, playing and trying to ignore the unsettling sensation that I was being watched. There's a chair right next to the piano, and out of nowhere, I heard the unmistakable sound of something metallic hitting the floor. It sounded like a coin dropping. The thing is, the room is carpeted. How could I hear a coin drop on carpet? I looked down, but there was no coin in sight, and the chair was completely empty. As I look back at all these strange occurrences, I realize there's a disturbing pattern. Each one began after I brought the piano into the house. I can't help but wonder, could it be that my piano brought more than just music into my life?